Oh my gosh, you're here.
How's it going?
Matteo, oh my God, it is so cool to see you in real time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
My room
Wow.
looks awesome. Your room looks great.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
a nice acoustic piano over there and a bunch of guitars and amps over there and some drums over there and more guitars over there. And
How's that little Audient treating you? Good?
this is actually quite sweet. Actually, I just swapped out the master bus board.
How you
I
put
bought
the HE in?
I no, just that it was giving me uneven levels and
Uh,
when I took a video and said, "Hey, Audient, what's going on?" They said, "You need this part." So I had to swap that out. But I bought
was it like the volume trim was off or something? Like on
the
the
master
speaker
levels.
outs?
The master levels were off, and I felt like every time I made a mix, there was a definite point in time where all of a sudden it felt like the mix was um, askew, like it really wasn't the stereo image that I thought I was creating.
I'm like a
And
stickler for that. I, I've
yes,
I've sort of learned how to grab so much of my mix from just making sure the center is really center,
yeah.
especially using analog, where you start to feel like the kick starts pulling this way and the snare starts pulling this way or the other way around.
I know that's
And
yeah,
anytime you're running anything, stereo compressors, parallel compressors, anything like that, it's going to shift the image a little bit. So if you don't calibrate things down to, as to a tenth of a dB at least, it's everything starts to shift. That's
yeah.
actually sort of my biggest when I go back and forth between hardware and plugins, a lot of times it's not the sound as much as the image.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Definitely.
It could sound better, but if the image goes crazy, then it doesn't sound better.
No, and there are sometimes some fantastic mixes that I'm enjoying out in the world that don't really do much for me in the headphones, but they sound killer out in the speakers.
That's true.
And
That's
they're not
true
my
too.
mixes. But when I'm doing mixes, I want things to sound glorious in the headphones, and maybe they're not translating good to speakers. Who knows?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle we all have, and I think depending on the era of music too, as
I've
to
noticed that.
I've been kind of on a '90s kind of kick lately,
Really?
and uh yeah, I just been going back and listening to a lot of like the JJP catalog from the '90s, and
Love that stuff.
everything was a lot brighter almost then in a way.
Oh, definitely.
It has a different, I don't know if it's brighter or the low end is just not as much. So when you're listening to new stuff, you
Partially
know,
that.
the
Yeah.
comparison is, I think now too, it's bright. We're brighter in the super top
Yeah, super
and
top and
now.
super bottom, and sometimes I really enjoy just the center. It's like everything else is too hyped, and it's like, well, the song doesn't really live there, so why don't I just focus on the center like JJP says, you know?
Yeah, the mid range is so important to the
Yeah,
whole mix. He's right about that. That's definitely one of his takes on it. And
yeah. But
um,
since you've done so much analog and now you're doing digital as well, I was wondering how anybody who was working professionally analog wise actually managed overall levels everywhere. Because now that we can see an EQ like on the master bus, it's so easy to say, your target really should be only minus 36 peak in the bass, and then maybe minus 48 peak, minus
I don't
30
ever
in the
remember anyone even saying any of that stuff. Honestly, it was like you looked at the left right meter on the console, you looked at your half-inch machine when you were printing, and
it wasn't blowing up, so you were okay.
yeah, and if it was blowing up, you trimmed it down. I remember some guys who had like passive trim pots built as part of their rig, and if the console was like totally exploding but sounded great, they'd run it through these passive attenuators in between the Studer half inch
Oh, wow.
and just kind of pat it down, but still have the console meters like slammed.
I never had anybody mention that either until I started studying different people's way of working digitally. And I thought, I think that's what's missing from my digital mixes because I would take things out to the car and I could leave things at totally down the mid range, like, I mean, in the middle, the bass, the mids, and the
Yeah.
highs for anything Dave O'Donnell did.
Sure. Oh, he's
Would sound
great.
beautiful in the car, but mine would be like, "Whoa, I need to attenuate the bass or need to put up the mids because I have like this allergy to mid-range. Like I don't want things to be too uh mid-range heavy." But then if you're lacking in that, it really lacks clarity. You got to be careful. So when they mentioned those levels, that really helped me. It helped me get into the
Huh.
ballpark. All you professional guys were saying, "That's ridiculous. I never heard anybody say that."
No,
It's
I know
ridiculous.
some people do like that meter thing where they set their levels that way.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, I don't even think like in the first 10 years that I was doing TV, I even looked at the meters. Like I just don't
I
if
mean
it feel
digitally.
yeah, yeah, we're supposed to be within a certain range in Dolby, and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know. I mix way louder than everyone and I just bring the master down in the end, but I still keep the energy of
Are you
sort of
doing
what I'm doing. I
Atmos
guess
stuff now
similar to
too?
the analog stuff,
Are you
those
doing
guys.
Atmos stuff now too?
No, I'm sort of waiting on that. I've been in 5.1 in television for God, 19 years,
Nice.
and no one even ever asked me about it. So, I'm not rushing out to go spend a ton of dough on a setup
What are you
until
what are you capturing 5.1 on? Because I can mix in 5.1 here in Logic, but I can't capture it on anything. I was working that out with Dave Moulton a bunch of years ago, and there was nothing we could record to so that I could take it out to my Acura and listen to it.
no, there isn't. I mean, the way that when I first started working in 5.1, and one of the reasons why I kind of don't like multi-channel anything, and I'm a fan of stereo, is I went out and I bought. So I knew I was going to be mixing a 5.1, and other than hearing, like, I was lucky, I got to hear these great mixers mix in 5.1, Elliot Scheiner and God, I can't remember this great Telarc engineer. His name is slipping me now, but he's an excellent engineer. So I heard this stuff, but I'd never done it on my own. And then all of a sudden I was having to mix in 5.1. So I went out on Amazon I don't even know if it was Amazon then, whatever it was. I bought like $800 Samsung all in the box, Blu-ray, 5.1 home player
Right.
with the wireless rears. And I would just DVR what I did and check it there. But to be honest with you, the thing that scared me the most about it was I bought this system and it had some calibration features in it, very basic, not even like they probably do today in home systems. It took me 6 months to make the thing sound right in my living room. And I
Wow.
do this for a living.
I know.
So it really got me thinking about, like, well, what is the average person? How are they setting this up? They probably got the rear speakers just next to the front speakers because, the, they don't want to put them in the back. They don't want to see any wires, whatever it is.
Sure.
So that kind of scares me. So I'm very conservative in my
Yeah.
5.1. It's basically just ambience and reverbs and stuff in the rears.
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of heavy panning.
A little bit of audience.
Yeah, a lot of audience. I just, the way that Dolby works when it does the down mix, it's taking what you put towards the rears and it's monoing them and putting them like 6 dB under, but also flipping the phase.
Oh,
So the way I look at it is like, say you want to get fancy and I'm going to make my guitars really wide and I'm going to start to push them out to the back. Well, your TV box is going to take half that guitar signal now and mono it and flip it out of phase. So then when you go listen back in the down mix, the guitars are lower.
no.
So that stuff sort of freaks me out a little bit. So I
Yeah.
just stick to sort of stereo-ish kind of mixing. And I'm not, again, it's going to be at least $20,000-$30,000 for me to really do Atmos correctly. And that's like not even going crazy with speakers.
I know.
And no one's asked me for it yet. So until they do, I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon. Let's see if Apple gets their way or not.
Yeah. What did
From
I
what
pull you away from this morning? Were you
well, I did a mix this morning in the city, Chance the Rapper. So I did that. That was 5 songs we did. And then I had to drive down to one of the mobile truck companies I work with, this company, Music Mix Mobile. They actually were nice enough to loan me some gear. that I had to drop back off to them, some mic pre's and stuff I needed for a session. And now I'm here back in my room at the barber shop, prepping some stuff for overdub session next week. When we're done with this, one of the guys is going to come up and give me a hand, and we're going to set up my live room for guitars and bass and keys and vocals. So
Sweet.
do that, and then I'm going to take a nice little long weekend, and then Monday we do 4 days on that, and then they come back the following week, I think, for another 5, and I think I got to do a mix in between.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, it's been good. I've been lucky that I've been staying pretty busy.
Yeah, super busy. Now, what is the amount of setup that's involved when you're doing live? Like sometimes you guys are outside, sometimes you're inside on a stage. You must have help setting up all those mics,
Oh yeah, no, I've got
line checks.
this guy Mitch has been with me for 20 years now. He's my stage
One,
A too. He's
one
great. He
one other person?
Well, no, he does just the stage, and then he has like an assistant for the concerts outside. Inside, he's
Okay,
on his own, and then we have Pat, who's our monitor engineer, and he works with the band's monitor engineer and all that stuff. And then Brian right now is our front of house engineer for the outside stuff. And then the company we use to rent our gear from, a company called PRG, who they're really well known in Manhattan. They do all the Broadway shows. They supply all the audio gear for that sort of stuff, all the theaters, a lot of corporate stuff.
wow,
And so their guy, Kevin, he's like our RF tech. He comes in and he's like the systems tech as if you were on a tour and you rented a package. So he shows up with the gear every day, tunes the RF, if we have to bring in a special wireless mic that's not one of our normal pieces, or, we've got extra in-ears that day, or they had to build a package for me because we've got a Broadway show with 30 singers and they're on different body pack mics versus
cool.
handheld. So it takes a whole team, and then there's lighting and power, and
Absolutely.
it's a big crew. It's definitely a big crew.
But what fascinates me is, a lot of times different people I've known have given me a little bit of feedback like, don't try to do so much by yourself. I mean, even when I was a little kid, it was like, decide, do you want to sing or do you want to play? And I was like, oh no, I want to do both. And then
Yep.
because I'm 9, 10 years old and I'm writing songs, I want to record them. I'm not going to be paying for studio time at that age. So there was a lot of years of writing songs where I wanted to capture things and I needed a dream machine to capture all this stuff. And like you, fell in love with recording. But I didn't necessarily want to be a recording engineer. So now people say to me, well, why don't you just be the artist and don't engineer and don't mix and then don't master and then don't, like all these things. But like live, you have to do all that stuff. It's not when does this need to be delivered. It's instant. It's happening.
Yeah, the way that I set it up, basically, it is like I'm recording, mixing, and mastering all at once. The way
That's
that
what I'm
my
thinking.
signal flow is. I'm probably more heavy-handed on stuff in the live situation, because I look at it as if I was going to track a record or a performance of any kind and I was sitting at a console, I would probably EQ and compress a little, go into tape or to Pro Tools, whatever you want to call it now.
Right.
And so that's going to happen. Then if I was mixing a record, I would be getting those tracks from someone who already EQ'd and compressed a little and did whatever it was they did to get the tone. So I sort of have a first layer of in my mixing where it's almost like this is tracking. I don't have a ton of time to move mics around. My assistant Mitch, he'll move some stuff for me, but sometimes it's so fast that it's not like I'm out there moving the snare drum mic over an inch. Like, I'll listen to the overheads, make sure they're balanced. As long as they're balanced and the snares in the center, everything else, unless it's really bad, I'm just going with. But that means my first layer of work is like some corrective EQ, high pass filtering, listening to what the bleed is. A lot of what my work is EQing out the bad bleed and pushing up the good bleed. If that means the background vocalist, the snare drum sounds really good in their mics, I'll push the background vocal mics up, and that's my drum room. If it's really bad and trashy, I'll go in with the dynamic EQ or dynamic compressor and work those frequencies out.
Wow.
Expanders, I use a lot of expanders, which is something I don't do as much in recording other than more for noise or if I'm looking for a certain feel. But I'll
What
use
are they doing what are they
two or
doing for you here that you would
uh,
that you decide to use them?
uh, like today I had a trumpet on and it was just a Sennheiser 421 on the stage and it was getting a lot of there was because it was a hip hop thing, the stage was loud. There's lots of side fills and wedges and subs. So it's just picking up everything. So I've kind of worked the EQ to get some of the subs out, and then I've used the dynamic compressor to like actually compress when the sub is going, when the kick is going. It's not reacting to the trumpet; it's reacting to
Mm.
that. And maybe there's something in the mid range where the snare's cracking in, so maybe I'm compressing a little bit of that. That's sort of now creating the horn. It's almost like opening the window.
Oh,
Like
wow.
someone's talking to you and you open the window and now it's gotten clear. So I'll do all that. And then in
Wow.
between, a lot of times, if I'm going to use a limiter, say it's a trumpet and I might pick a Fairchild or something. Before the Fairchild, I might put an expander in. So when they're not playing, the gain is getting reduced by maybe 3 or 5 dB in between the notes. So that bleed is going to go lower because the compressor is going to release higher,
Wow.
right? So when this horn
Good.
hits, the compressor, the limiter goes down a couple of dB if I'm trying to make it sit a certain way, but then it's
Okay.
going to come back up. Well, when that's coming back up, my expander's pulling down so that noise isn't getting raised 6 dB. If
That's
that
great.
makes sense. So like a lot of little things like that that you wouldn't have to do on a record that you're thinking about. Same thing with vocals. I'm always listening to the vocal in every instrument.
Mm.
So maybe the drummer has a wedge to his hi-hat side and there's a ton of vocal in there and that's bleeding through the hole between the hi-hat and the snare drum and the snare drum's picking that up or the snare bottom's picking it up and it sounds like this. So I'm working that out of the drum sound. So the
Mhm.
vocal, I always start with the vocal. So if the vocal's there, I start to bring up stuff around it and I hear things change. It gets nasally or muddy or boomy. I'm going to that instrument that I brought up and saying, well, let me solo that now. And oh,
Right.
yeah, there's
Right.
this going on. Let me see if I can address that. And at the same time, not ruin the instrument or really the part.
Yeah.
It's really hard with the dynamics to keep the intent of the artist, the intent of the performance is what I'm
Yeah.
always trying to preserve if I can as much as possible.
But you have different styles and different artists every day. So
Yeah.
do you have people tipping you off a couple days before to say, "Hey, this is coming, make sure you're hip to this sound," or is there a person in the band that works with you that says, "Looking over your
I
shoulder"?
I do prep from the beginning as far as when the band is booked. Like I'm in touch with managers and tour managers
Okay,
and
good.
and front of house guys and monitor guys, and I'm the one that's ordering all the equipment too. So
Oh,
I'm putting in the orders for all the gear because
how much
they
lead
might
time
be
to
anywhere from 3 weeks to a day. It
oh,
just
wow.
depends. I mean, we could have something where we've had a band booked in our inside studio and say they've been booked for a month and I think I know everything. And then let's say the week before their song blows up on the radio, right? Then the day before that, a producer might say, let's move this outside because this artist is so big, they're going to draw a big crowd if we say they're out there. So then I have to go from our inside
Oh,
package to the outside package. And that
oh,
changes a lot of things with monitors and, from our built in console to renting consoles.
wow.
And that could happen at 4 in the afternoon for a performance that's going to happen at 7 a.m., 8 a.m.
And
So
how much help do you have to, like, set up all these new consoles and everything
Well,
else?
all those guys do it. My job's easy.
Oh, okay.
I set up my stuff and I mix. I have a
Yeah.
big template that my console, I have a setup where I have 3 Pro Tools rigs and a console.
Wow.
One Pro Tools rig, look at it this way. Uh, the one Pro Tools rig's a Studer tape machine. That's all it is. It's a multi-track. So
Okay.
all I do with that is just record the rehearsal and the performances. The console is an SSL, right? It's not. It's a company called Lavo, but let's say that's my SSL, and then the other Pro Tools rig is my outboard gear. I use that as a plugin server, basically. It's an insert, send and return,
To the
group in, and
console.
yeah, aux sends to effects from the console. I have a third Pro Tools rig that's my playback machine. So if I have to play the tracks for the artist, that's on another machine. I load the WAV files into that. So I'll wait for the director to cue me, three, two, one, I hit playback, then the band starts going, and then my hands are on the console and I'm doing the mix.
Wow, wow, wow. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's pretty like once you do it enough, it's pretty straightforward. I built a system that really I can be up and running pretty quickly. I don't have to, everything is sort of pre-built in a way because, like you said, it's different music every day.
Mhm,
So my template has like 130 channels of instruments
mhm.
of everything you can imagine from drums to percussion to violin, strings, horns. It's all there, vocals. So I just kind of import in what I need for the day along with all my effects and buses and everything. And they pop up and I just patch from the stage boxes, digitally into my inputs on my mic pre's and I'm
Yeah.
good to go.
Wow, wow.
So it's not that complicated. My signal flow is probably more complicated than like the actual setup, just
Mm.
because I work in a particular way.
Well, they
Um,
love what you're doing all these Emmys later.
that's just right time, right place.
That's
That's
so awesome.
that's good artists. I get lucky.
I was checking out your bio too. I mean, you got to study with so many fantastic people. I mean, you just being a runner over at Avatar for it's just amazing all the
Yeah,
people you were around.
it was crazy. Yeah, I got there when I was 19, and I was
Yeah.
there for 4 years. I went from like runner to general assistant. I never became an assistant. I went freelance actually before that happened. At the time in the early 2000s, I literally started at Avatar right before 9/11, like
Oh,
months before. And after 9/11, like New York City kind of just shut down there. And no one was flying anymore from Europe or Japan or
no.
LA to come to New York at that point. Everyone was freaked out about even getting in a plane. So studios started closing around that time. And then Napster happened like a year later. So it went from this like hotbed of like 150 recording studios to like 20 or 30. And no assistants were moving up. So there wasn't like that spot for me to take because this guy was going to go be an engineer. People were just like hanging on at that point. It was sort of a tough time in the industry.
Was that
And
your original plan? You thought you were going to move up and stay working
I
there?
thought I was going to be an assistant and then, I would catch on with someone and become an engineer. It didn't quite go that way. I had been in like this general assistant role where you cover all the studios. You could be in studio A for an hour and then studio B needs you and you're helping out the assistants. And I wanted to be an assistant. I was getting bored, kind of waiting, and I just saw the writing on the wall. And at the same
Mm.
time, I was talking to like a lot of smaller bands and sort of building up this smaller client list. And then the NBC thing happened and I was just there in the beginning, a day or two here and there, maybe 3 days, 1 week, one day, another week. And it at the
Mm.
time, coming from being a general assistant in the early 2000s, I think I was making 565 an hour. So I could make what I'd make in a 40-hour week in less than a day. So I was like, well, I don't have any bills. So I would do NBC 2 or 3 days a week and then go do records.
Wow.
And that sort of got me going in the beginning where I didn't need to make every dollar from albums. And it
Right.
afforded me to get to do some really cool projects that went on for long periods of time and stuff that I was able to produce and do all on my own even at a young age because I could do it for a little bit less because I was paying my bills, with the NBC money I was making. So it sort of worked out. I kind of, I'll always wonder if I went the other direction, but that time is long gone.
Well, what would that have been? top engineer at a big studio?
No, I mean, I was ended up being chief engineer at a couple of studios along the way, so I don't know if I'd want to be a staff engineer, but
Yeah.
I didn't do records for like a 10-year period at all, where I just did TV and I was sort of focused on some other things in my life. And, I thought the TV was enough to satisfy me and it just wasn't. I was trying to, I guess it sort of became a job for a while.
Mm.
And it was fine. I tried to do other things as like hobbies to not be doing this all the time. And it was tough at that time, 2006, 2007, 2008, 9. Those were like, the recession kind of was kicking in and
Mm.
no one was making any money. So at the time it was, well, NBC's offering me a full-time gig. I could buy a house and live a normal life, or I can keep searching for work that no labels want to pay for right now.
Right.
And so I took the staff job, and that just sort of the responsibilities got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you're doing 225 bands a year, you just don't really have the time as much, or I didn't use my free time for it as much.
Mm.
Um, and then around a little before the pandemic, I started getting back into things, and then I had 7 months to kind of really do it, and here I am,
It's great.
still doing it. Yeah.
What is giving you the magic and the goosebumps and the or versus, what gear is exciting you these days? Like what is the thing that is most propelling you right now?
First I'll say yes, I love gear, and I've got a lot of it. And what excites me more is knowing that I can use the gear and not think about it now and think about the music. And now I spent a lot of years where I would focus on one thing. Like I do like a year in review to myself. And I'd go back and listen to stuff I did over the course of the year and go, my low end sucked this year. So next year I'm focused on low end. Or and then I would go, well, low end is good now, but my width and depth are not there. And then it would
Huh.
be, well, I want my vocals to be bigger than mono, but not stereo and not sound like they've got effects on them. I focus on
Yeah.
that. And I did like all of these technical things. And
Wow.
like almost like you were saying with the mid range, I spent a lot of time being clinical and analytical about like carving all these frequencies out and multi-banding stuff out and making stuff pristine. And I sort of learned how to do all of that stuff. And now I don't do as much of it, but I also don't really think anymore about any of it. I think I've gotten to the point where I just know how, when I hear a sound, I kind of know how to get it and I know what tool is going to give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm finally like more focused on the music and the parts and the arrangement. And
Mm.
it's not this like, I got to get this compressor and do this thing with it. It's more like I'm thinking to myself, you know, the lyrics in the bridge really change the tone of the song. So when that first chord of the bridge comes, how can I change the mood of the
Mm.
song? And the
Yeah.
way that I've sort of built my technical stuff, everything is there for me all the time. So I never have to think of it. And that's something really that came from the live situations where I realized if I had everything available to me and the artist comes in and says, "Hey, can you do this thing?" I don't have
Mm.
to be like, "Yeah, hold on, let me load this plugin and make an aux input and do this." I go, "Sure," and I pull up the fader and it's there, and they're like, "Oh my God, you understand me? You know what?" And it's just being prepared. So I sort of have, even in the studio making records, my mixing template has like everything in the kitchen sink. And it doesn't mean I'm going to use it. It
Mm.
just means all I have to do with like vocals, for instance, I've got faders, all different types of tones and compressors ready to go. And I've got one aux send feeding like 24 different effects that are all just it's set at 0, feeding them all the time, and the faders downs. I quickly will just blend faders up and create a vocal sound without
Nice.
ever opening a plugin. Yeah, I
Wow.
know like what my stuff is. I've got harmonizers and delays that go from short to long, and panny things and lush things and short verbs and long verbs, and they're sort of all there and I know where they are, but I can quickly just literally push up a fader and with 10 fingers put up 10 different effects and kind of blend them and go, all right, this is a good starting point. Let me start to build the song around this now. And I might change later and I might have to dive into a plugin at some point to tweak something. But I'm thinking more about, is this work for the music and not like, does this work for the mixer? You know,
Wow.
does this work for my ego? It's like, what works for the song? I know I
Yeah.
can accomplish anything I want with analog and digital together. Like I can do it all. But if I'm sitting there looking at it, it's just like to stroke my own ego and not to fulfill the song.
Hmm.
And the quicker I can fulfill the song and what the artist needs there, I think the better the mix is and the happier the artist is. So I keep
Wow.
working.
But what size console are you using that you have all those able to return for anything? That's a
Well, in Pro Tools, it's just HDX. I have a couple HDX cards and Mac
oh, okay.
Studio Ultra. I mean, this worked on my trash can when I had that, and even my cheese grater. And then in NBC, I've got a Lavo console. I don't know, it's like 850 inputs or something. It's like crazy. So I never run out of, I think I'm running like 64 buses and 60 something aux sends, and they're all there. Everything is there and it's patched. I don't ever have to think about anything technical. Like I
Yeah.
rarely like I'll change the plugin for a different character or tone. Like I have a starting point. Like, yes, I've got stuff that I know is going to work on the bass. But number one, if there's 5 plugins on there, I might use 1 or 2. I might use
Mm.
all 5. I might wipe out all 5 and go with something else because the song calls for it. But I just have stuff that I can quickly, without even touching a mouse, just on my controller, unbypass stuff, start to turn knobs and not get into the weeds so quickly. Like that to me is more
Mm.
I'm starting with yards and moving to feet and getting to inches and centimeters. So it's sort of broad strokes in the beginning. It's
Mm.
getting an overall feel. I know when I start with my vocal, it's not going to be the final end all be all vocal sound,
Yeah.
but I'm also not going to like boost a ton of stuff right away either, right? I'm gonna get the vocal feeling good, knowing later on I'm probably gonna have to add some more high end, but I might not. So instead of me doing that right away and then trying to make the guitars just as bright or the snare brighter or the cymbals, like I'm starting at a point where everything can sort of, and if they need to get brighter along the way as a mixing, I will do that if that's what it calls for. But I don't want to back myself into a corner already by like just being bright or being bass heavy or um it's just as the parts come together, then oh, I added this in and now I feel that, you know, okay, this guitar's got a lot of low mid stuff and it's kind of clashing with the keyboard. So
Mm.
let me see which one works better to maybe trim back some of those low mids. Or now that
Mhm.
the guitar solo's in, the piano feels dull coming out of it. So maybe I need to, work something after the guitar solo with the piano or whatever. Yeah, it's just how my brain works. It's different for every song.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow. And everything is right there ready for you to just rock it. It's just fascinating.
yeah, it takes a little longer for the Pro Tools session to load, and you need a little more DSP. But um, realistically, DSP is pretty cheap these days if you think about it, and compared to what it would cost to have 10 racks of outboard gear of all that stuff behind you. A Mac Studio is like 4 grand. So
That's a
uh,
cool idea.
I can run anything on that. My session's up right now. This is a tracking session. Even a tracking session, I'll have stuff available on there that I can get away with as far as latency goes. But once the session's ready to mix, then I import my mix stuff
Hmm.
and it just sort of has everything. I sort of look at a lot of the stuff I have A good way to describe it is, like Waves has the artist series of plugins,
Right.
like JJP has one, CLA, and they're just like sliders, and it's real,
Yeah.
it says bite or it says spank or
Mhm.
whatever. I look at it that way. A lot of these things to me are just tone sliders.
Yeah.
I want more length, so I'll go with this one. I want more impact, I'll go with this one. And I'm kind of mixing into compression and mixing into, a lot of my compressors are um, just sitting there on aux inputs,
Right.
and all my channels have aux sends on those channels like a reverb, but I'll just send to a compressor. So depending on what I'm looking for, I don't do it in instrument like food groups. I do it more in arrangement food groups.
Oh, cool.
So like drums and bass are kind of together in a thing, and rhythm stuff like maybe rhythm guitar or a keyboard or piano that goes with the rhythm will go together to where they're headed, but then maybe the top line or the solo or the stuff that I might want to be on top, I'll send to different compressors. So this way, as I'm pushing them up, my rhythm is not disappearing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because since everything is getting mixed through compression, I never do not hear a compressor from
Oh,
the second I start. My mix bus is on, my instrument bus is, yeah, I have it set up where it's like rhythm, melody, vocals, chords, and all those buses. As I push those faders up, it's going into that stuff. It doesn't
cool.
go to like the master ever until those subgroups get to the master.
Right. So
So like,
those are on subgroups.
yeah, those arrangement food groups, if you will, go down to the mix bus, which then goes to the master. So as soon as I put a fader up, it's being affected by my stuff. And I know how it's calibrated. And, you know, I can hear just from using it so long, if I'm pushing into it too hard or not hard enough or
Right.
something, oh, the instrument groups feel good, but they're hitting the mix bus too hard. So I can just pull the groups down and then the mix bus starts to breathe better. Um,
But
so
you did
it's,
all that setup, right?
yeah,
You made all those connections and auxes, and you did the
yeah,
hard
I,
wiring of
I,
everything because
I basically, I've been fortunate enough to watch a lot of really good guys work. So, I stole lots of concepts from different guys and sort of built it into my own thing, I guess, through the years. Um,
and that's what you've just described, or you have other things you can tell me?
I mean, there's always something in there, but yeah, a lot of stuff, I was fortunate enough to get to spend some time with Michael Brower, and he showed me a lot of cool stuff. And, when I was at Avatar, I got to watch so many people
Yeah,
work. You know, JJP, and I've had, at NBC, I've had different guys in CLA, and so I've got to watch like just tons of different great engineers work. And through the years, I would say, oh, that sounds really cool, and just kind of throw that into my arsenal. Or if I see something on a video or read about it, I had like all the years that I from high school through uh you know and probably up until like 10 years ago, I'd get like every magazine would come in the mail to me. So when I was taking the
oh
bus
yeah,
into the city, I would read mix and EQ and all the stuff. And so
definitely.
I read every one of those things back to front to back like 5 times every month. So if
And I
I'd
feel
see something, I get an idea,
yeah,
try it out. If it worked, it worked. A lot of times stuff I have is just stuff that I've made up by
mhm,
chance, by mistake. If I really like something I did, I'll go, all right, let me pop that into the template, and it's there. And then I can go like, hey, that thing I did on that reggae thing, I want that delay again, that dub delay that I created with the this and that and the other thing. And it's there. So I just bring the
okay.
return up or send to it, and then I have it.
It's still
And
there from 3 years ago.
some of this template started in 2004,
Wow.
and it's been going ever since. Some of the stuff's
Growing
yeah,
ever since. Yeah, wow,
yeah.
that's super cool. What would you say is the thing that makes a bunch of regular tracks sound like a record the most without sounding overhyped with today's overproduction and supersonic killing you with bass and killing you with high end. Like
Just
sometimes
good
people would say to me,
performances,
yeah, it's not
good parts
necessarily,
and good. No, I mean,
but there's something almost, it must be the sound of compression that I'm hearing when something is really soft and wonderful, but it sounds like it could almost burst. It's got so much pressure in it, and yet it's perfect and clear and powerful without being loud, and yet uh, it just sounds fantastic. What are you talking about? Like Dave O'Donnell.
that's, I
Like
mean,
like like Dave O'Donnell will do a James Taylor album, and it doesn't sound like a hip hop record, but it doesn't sound like his early records from 1976 either.
stuff is just louder now. I keep hearing this thing that the loudness wars are over, but if you see the level rough mixes coming to me, it's not. And you have to figure out how to get there, because if the artist has been listening to a -6 mix
Mm,
for 3 months while they're making their record and you deliver on -12, like you're gonna get fired. They're just not gonna like it. And mastering is not gonna be able to make up that much level without destroying your mix.
yeah.
So I just mix loud. I just accepted the fact that this is what's gonna have to be. And if I can deliver a mix at whatever level or a little bit louder than what they've been listening to, I'll keep my gig. Um, do I love that all the time? No. Is it appropriate for everything all the time? Absolutely not. But that's sort of the name of the game. I need to work. And
Hmm.
if the art, that's just what people are accustomed to listening to. And you
Hmm.
have to be, I've gotten pretty good, I think, at making the volume with keeping the dynamics. That's something I spent a lot of time on. Like, I get offended with myself if the limiter is actually working. Like, I've got a limiter on all the time, but my goal is to finesse that thing so much that it's working like a half a dB.
Hmm.
Even all my mix bus compressors, I think that's a lot of it. A lot of guys just lean into the bus and the mixes are like there. Like, a lot of times I'll have to tell the client, like, okay, the first couple of notes are not going to be as loud as the rough mix, or the verse is not going to be as loud as the rough mix. But when it gets to the chorus, A, B mine versus your chorus on the
Yep.
rough, it's going to be louder than your rough, but I'm creating a dynamics in there. A lot
Yeah.
of times with roughs, or if I'm remixing something that the artist did somewhere else and didn't like, it's like the mix feels like this in your face the whole time.
Yeah. And then there's a
Um,
breathe.
there's a way to make it loud and make it breathe. But if you're just going to live inside a compressor and a limiter, there's nowhere for it to go. It's like a,
Yeah.
caged animal. Like, it wants to get out, but it's an animal that's too big for its cage.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like the hairs bursting out of the cage, but they can't break free.
Right.
And so I work with a lot of little stages of things to let it, everything moves. That's why I do it as an arrangement thing with my groups,
Yeah.
because nothing before it gets to the mix bus, even, they're all sort of working with each other.
Nice.
So if the drums are doing its thing and it's like in and out, and you feel that groove, and then I go to bring up the guitar solo, which needs to be just as loud as the vocal was, the drum thing is never going away because it's already being contained on its own, with the bass, and they're moving. But then if you just have, you know, a 33609 or an SSL bus compressor on, and you're not doing anything prior, you got to push that stuff up. Your drum's going to start to disappear, or that
Yep.
groove is going to start to go away.
Yep. I've done
So I look at it as like, I've done it a million times. That's why I start with the vocal first, and I kind of try to feel like, all right, is this vocal hot, in a sense? Like, is this vocal not clipping and is going to be on top and it's sitting there and it feels good? Okay, now I know where I can go. And then I build the loudest part of the song first. So I usually go to the
Yeah.
end. I'll go to like the last double chorus or the bridge, whatever the loudest thing is, and build the mix and then pull back.
Mhm.
because then I know this is it. I'm here. I've hit the limit on this last chorus. So now I can go back and, maybe automate the EQ on the bass down a couple of dB in the beginning and let it come back in, or pull the guitars in a little in the verse and pan them
Mhm.
out in the chorus and pull the master down. I might start with at 0 for my the outro piece, but the master might be down 2 dB at the beginning of the song.
Mhm.
And I'm building it up. You'll see my master, and it's like a set of stairs going up almost, or up and down, and so all those things, and that's living within my world of compression, I guess. And they're moving off each other, so it'll feel like it's constantly getting bigger,
Wow.
constantly growing, instead of just like, here's the song, here you go. And by the first chorus, you're like, well, nothing's happened. Like, okay, the intro guitar on its own was just as loud as when the drum fill came in, and then the chorus is the same level as the intro guitar,
Mm.
and now it hurts, and I'm turning it down, and all of a sudden I'm not paying attention to lyrics anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
A-
that's what
and
some people do.
and I just that's common. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, I think, and
What are
it's
people
good.
getting what are people getting wrong, and what would you correct?
I don't think anyone's getting anything wrong per se. There's just easy ways to do things. Yeah, if you're gonna put an L2 or something Pro L on your mix and put the gain up 6 dB, yeah, it's gonna be loud. And that's an easy way to do it, but it might not sound as good as other ways if you take your time. And
Mhm.
that's just unfortunately something that just takes a lot of time. Like, I'm still trying to figure it out. And
Mhm.
next year will be year 30 since I got my first 4 track and started recording. And
Wow.
I've been fortunate enough to mix like almost every day of my life since then.
Wow.
So I've just got a lot of mixes under my belt, and I'm still figuring out. So I can only imagine what it's like for the guy who never got to watch these guys and never was in a big studio, and all they do is see these tutorials and these things on YouTube. And that's great because that didn't exist. Like, we had Mix Magazine and EQ Magazine and Audio Media, and that was like it. And so I would have killed for that stuff back then. The problem
Mhm.
is anyone can do it. Anyone can post a video, and I think a lot of people that are posting videos are still on the learning journey themselves. So
Yeah.
maybe and I don't think it's bad intent. I don't think anyone's trying to put people down the wrong path. But if you've never been in
Right.
the situations to learn and just had the chair time to figure it out on your own, like, how
Yeah.
many people have the luxury of me to say, well, next year I'm going to spend a year working on low end?
Mhm.
Well, if you're only going to work on one project all year and mix 6 songs, and I'm going to do that the first week of the year, I'm just going to have more time in the chair to learn these things. So by the end of the year, I've mixed 300 songs and you mix 10. I'm going to pick up more that year. I'm going to, just from trial and error. It's just at this point, like, I know now from hearing a million broken things, when something's broken, what that noise is.
Mhm.
And like today, we had an issue where there was a level mismatch on something, and I could hear it just from the hiss right away. And the artist team was going, "No, you're wrong. It's this, that, and the other thing." I'm like, "Please trust me. I know it's." And of course, it was right. And I'm not trying to be like a know-it-all. Just when you've heard a gazillion noises over 30 years, you pick, oh, that's single-ended. That's 60 cycle hum. That's the quarter inch not being plugged in all the way. That's your converters, set to +4 instead of, whatever. Any one of these things, and it's like the same thing when you hear.
Mhm.
I get a lot of messages on Instagram, what plugin should I use for this? If I could buy one compressor, what should it be? What would you use on this instrument? And it's just so hard to give like one answer because it depends on the source.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do is try everything early on and learn. I know all the sounds of these things just because I've used them so much.
Mhm.
So in my mind, if I hear something that needs a DBX 160, that type of sound, like, I know exactly what that thing does. And in my mind, I'm not thinking technical. I'm like, 160. Okay, I want it to do pet pet pet. And I'll do it, or whatever it is. I need something with some color. You've done it. Can tell, pick up the top of my head what +6 at 8K is on an SSL strip versus, a Neve. It's just the years of
Wow.
doing it. And then you sort of have in your mind like this index card system of like, okay, I need this.
Mm.
Go to there and do it. And that's just gained with time doing it. There's no I you I learned really early on. I went and sat with Michael Brower a bunch of times and I had this book of notes and I wrote all this stuff down. And this is when I worked at Avatar. And I went from, he was at Quad at the time, and I watched him and I wrote all these notes down. And I went back to Avatar that night and they had studio, whatever was open with the SSL. And I go to the outboard closet and I'm rolling up 100 pieces of outboard gear, and all the techs are looking at me like I'm an asshole. And I plug in all this gear and I got the settings and I'm like writing it down, thinking like, I've got the answer here. This is it. I'm on my way. And it was the worst thing I ever did. It sounded so bad. It was just pitiful. And I took it all off and went back to the way that I knew, and it sounded way better. You can't you
It
can't
is
take
not
my
about that.
settings. You can't take my settings and make it work for you. I can
Yeah.
give you some ideas. Some guy on YouTube can give you some ideas and say, well, 1176 works out well for vocal on me. And you can try that and experiment on your own. Maybe it doesn't work for you. Maybe the way you EQ or the way you record 1176 sucks for vocal for you and you need something else.
Mhm.
Um, that's sort of for your ears to figure out. You can be given the guidance, but then you got to run with it on your own and just sit in the
Yeah.
chair and do it a lot. That's there's no there's no fast way around it. If there
Nope.
was, we'd all be Bob Clearmountain.
Yep.
And there's only one, and no one else is going to be him, and no one else is going to be Tom Lord Algae. And, that doesn't mean there's other people that don't have mixes that are just as good as those guys. They just do it differently.
And isn't it interesting how Bob Clearmountain took the Bruce Springsteen song "Born in the USA" and turned that snare into like a gunshot and made that song happen. Like he made those tracks support the lead vocal. I heard those tracks dry and it was so uninteresting. And Bruce was just singing the way he sang, and he was trying so hard, but he had like no support from the band, it seemed like. But as soon as Bob got to it and turned it into this, it was like he became part of the band. And there were producers in the old days that I loved that were just capturing things and they weren't influencing the production much. And that worked too. So, like you're saying, it depends on the song. Dry tracks to Instant Karma are like, mm, it's a band playing in a room. But as soon as Phil Spector added that, it was a hit. And I don't always like what Phil Spector has done to things, but that particular song
Yeah.
rocked the
I,
house.
some of his arrangements blow my mind. It's funny. I actually have a book about him in my lounge sitting there, and I keep meaning to read it again just because, while he was a wild man, he had some great ideas, and the sound of some of those records to me is still like can't be beat. Just the way that
Yeah.
it's not even the sound, it's the feel. Those
Mm.
records just feel really good, and they're hyped, but in like a realistic sort of way, I guess.
He found a spot that was magic for a lot of people, not just him.
Yeah, I mean, come on, he probably made the greatest Christmas record of all time. I
Right?
mean, that's like, what's
That one feels
Christmas
really
without
good.
that? It feels great. I mean, it's
Yeah.
incredible. I like a lot of those older records. I mean, I'm always trying to do whatever the song calls for, but I listen to a lot of Wilson Pickett and that sort of stuff. I think the
Hmm.
drums and stuff on that are just incredible. The low end on that is incredible. Is it as big as, some 808 hip hop thing today? No, but it's just it moves the speakers in a different way. Like, disco
Yeah.
records, the low end just, chic records move the low end in
Yeah.
a different way than today's records do. It's like they're bigger. You
Yeah.
know, well, I guess there's more space maybe in the arrangement and whatever was done back then. I don't know, but it just maybe it's the arrangement. It just the bass is so, and it's not as subby, and it's not,
Right.
probably lives higher up. It's probably like 150, 200 hertz or something. It's rounder and warmer, and
More
it,
melody, more notes. Not just
yeah, and even like the bass locked with it. It's not this big thunderous bass, but it's warm. It's got
yeah,
like a feel to it that the groove is right. And I
yeah.
think a lot of that just had to do with the players too. I think back then you had better performers. Unfortunately, it's
I think so too. I
coming
think you
true.
had more musicians, more players, and a lot more personality and magic in the parts and in the performance, like you're saying.
I think it's technology. I think, I'm a firm believer that somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, technology and talent like met in a really amazing place. But now,
Strangled each other.
yeah, and it was awesome. And there was so much going on. But now I feel like technology might have taken over talent. It's like there's more technology than there is the talent now. And it's easy for us to use the technology to fake the talent.
Yeah.
And like I look at my kids,
How old are
eh,
they now?
uh, 15 and 13.
Oh, wow.
And they are of the iPad generation. It's a different thing. They don't wait uh, for Thursday night at 9 o'clock to watch Seinfeld. They
No.
wanted to watch Seinfeld, not that they even know what that is, but if they wanted to watch that, they would hit play in a little box. So how many kids are going to have the wherewithal to be Eddie Van Halen and sit in their bedroom and practice an instrument for 6 hours every day after school and not leave the room when you can go take your iPad out or MPC and go boop, boop, bop and drag a thing in that's a pre-recorded MIDI pack and you've got a song and you look like you're a superstar beat maker. Like, it's human nature. You're going to take most people will take the easy way out. So I wonder, like, where is the music going? And you got to wonder, like, how many Abletons or Beatmaker keyboards does Guitar Center sell over what they used to sell guitars or violins for students or drum kits?
It's an interesting question, I'm
It's
sure.
got to be totally askewed from, let's say the early 90s, or the mid 90s when more music was made analog. And by that, I mean like real instruments
Real
uh,
people.
and real people. Yeah, not soft synths and MIDI.
I know as a musician, it's been really difficult for me to stay listening to lots of stuff like I used to. And thankfully, with teaching, I'm still current. My students will always tell me what's going on, or you can tell from what they're writing what's going on. And I'll say, "What influenced you?" And they'll play me the original things. But I haven't been listening to a lot of things in the last batches of years. And then recently I hooked up some extra studio monitors I had in another room and put on some songs that I used to love. And I was nearly in tears. I was just so happy to hear real instruments and real people playing and real people playing brilliantly and real mixes that didn't sound hyped and didn't sound overcooked or just blown up for the sake of blowing it up. And I was like, this is what I've been after. And it's like, oh, no wonder I haven't been listening to a ton of stuff because people haven't been doing this in decades.
I
You know,
think there's
it
stuff
has
out
been,
there. It's just so hard to find. And
yeah. Well, it's all
I
it's all indie. It's all what we're doing. It's all these unknown people.
and the I as great as streaming is, that yes, you've got any song you want in your pocket.
Mm,
It's harder for me to find new music because I still, and I know this sounds so out of touch and out of date, I just miss the community of a record store. That was a big part of my youth, was like we had these great local indie record stores here in New Jersey, and I knew the owners of a few of them, and we would go, like, you could, when I was in bands, you'd put your band's cassettes there for sale or your 7 inches and your
mhm.
flyers for your shows, and you'd hang out in the record store all day and they'd have like their record picks, and you would walk in and someone pick up something and it's like, "Oh, what's that?" They'd be like, "Oh, this is this new band, you should check this out." just
Yeah.
from someone that you bumped into in a record store that you'll never meet again just because you saw a cover.
Wow.
And I know that's probably a, it's an outdated, more expensive model at 10 or 12 bucks a CD, but I felt like I found more stuff then that stayed with me for my life than
Well, it
stuff on
actually fed you.
streaming.
It actually fed you. I mean, that's what I've been trying to explain to some of my friends. It's like, it's not that I dislike this or that. It's just that it doesn't feed me, and I need more as a professional musician. I need something that is deep or is saying something or has some decent playing. If I just hear bad guitar playing, I might as well just be working, like teaching,
Yeah.
because it's like I hear enough of that. I want to hear something really good, and it doesn't matter what the style is, but you can tell in an instant for me, it's like you can tell a good mix or what's the problem with the mix or what the noise is buzzing over there. I can tell what's wrong with that guitar player. And it's like, I can't fix everybody. I can't give them all the best tips and they won't take them anyway, because like you say, they're not practicing. And as much as I want to stay current and listen to something new, if it's not up to a specific level of communication and it's not giving me goosebumps, I can't help that. It's just not part of
I
the.
feel like I find a couple of good records every year, but
Yeah.
I feel like I used to find like 10 good records every year.
Yeah.
And now maybe it's one or two. And I listen to a lot.
Hmm.
I really do go out, and if I see a band on Instagram that looks like they might be kind of cool, I'll pull it up on Spotify and give it a good listen. And if I like it, reach out to them. Um,
And you've been hearing everybody that's out there current because they're there live every day.
yeah, and
You know what
honestly,
the
I
hot
mean,
stuff
that's
is.
part honestly, without sounding terrible, that's sort of the tough part for me about that gig is I don't get to really work on what I like to work on. Just the fact of the matter is the demographic of that show
Hmm.
doesn't really fit in the wheelhouse of what I listen to personally.
What is
So
your favorite stuff to listen to or what that you'd love to work on?
there's so many that, and it's not that I've worked with a lot of amazing people. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's been some amazing, amazing things that I've got to do. Um,
Hmm.
I'm just, we do a lot of country and we do a lot of pop, and those are just not really in my wheelhouse. I'm more of like you. I want to hear real musicians and real instruments, and it's not one style. It just is the song compelling to me. And I
Yeah.
know in some of this pop stuff I do, there's compelling work in there. It's just covered up with 808s and hi-hats and too much auto tune. I do a lot of times when I'm mixing, I'd be like, when I strip everything away, when I get rid of all the schmutz,
The
there's a great,
schmutz.
yeah, there's like a great song in here, but with some of the production choices, it gets a little watered down. Country is very, it's a formula, and
Yeah.
it's almost, lyrically, it's really the same. And that's sort of, I'm a lyric person. Like I'm really into, on top of music, like I like a good story. I
Oh
like a
well.
great story in music that, you can relate to, those type of stories that it doesn't matter your situation or my situation. When you're in that moment and you hear that song, you relate to that situation.
Mm,
You feel like it's part of your situation, and I
sure.
don't hear that when every song is about pretty little thing and sweet tea and drinking on the back of a pickup. It's just like, it's almost like there's a lot of times I feel like they just have like it's just a slot machine wheel and they pull it and it's like, okay, it's gonna be mama, summertime, four wheeler, or beer, tears, and and it's just like the same. I feel like I've mixed that same song like 5,000 times.
Yeah.
And it's not a knock on the players or the artists. They're from Nashville. They're all great players and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
The singers are usually really great too. It's just not my cup of tea. But I always try to, whether it's a pop thing or a boy band or I try to find whatever thing in there I enjoy and work with that to get myself in the
Yeah.
zone. But some days it's a job.
Well, yeah, I think they say that about any job. You
Yeah.
know. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you're gonna find something in there go, "Ugh, why is this part of it?"
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, I think we all have to do a lot of that, especially coming up.
Yeah.
I took anything, I'd say yes to everything just so I could get some work and you would always learn.
Mm,
I wish, one thing I always tell like the guys that work with me, the younger guys that help out, if you're going to get a mediocre band or a mediocre song or a mediocre arrangement, you can
mm,
EQ the hell out of it. You can compress it, you can edit it, you can sample it, you can do everything. It's still going to be kind of mediocre. So
mhm.
don't kill yourself if it sounds mediocre. You're probably taking something that's really bad and making it mediocre. So you've won. But you also
Mhm.
need to know like there's no way I'm making this drummer any better. So it's just time to walk away. He's inconsistent and no matter what we do, it's going to sound like that. And I couldn't do that for a long time, and
Yeah, you thought
it
it
would
was
like,
you.
yeah, I always thought it was me, but looking back, it's like, oh, well, the
Mhm.
guy couldn't play drums. He didn't know how to tune his drums. It was recorded in a basement with 7-foot ceilings. It's not going to sound like the power station.
I know I have basic tracks to Al Green's Let's Stay Together, just the multi-track, just 8 tracks. And you just put up any of those faders and it's like amazing. And the song's right there, like the whole arrangement but the voices are closer and it just sounds like people standing there singing. You go, oh, that's what my background vocals sound like, just people standing there. And I remember even hearing Living in the Alternate World, listening to George Harrison's Living in the
Yeah.
World alternate tracks, and sometimes there was a drummer or two, and it was like, wow, my drums sound like that when I record them. So there's hope,
Yeah, I mean, well, there's something to be said for what it's supposed to sound like when you're tracking, and by the time it's not
Yeah,
going to sound like a mixed thing when you're tracking. So,
right. Unless it's you doing it live
well, I'm doing
for
it because
NBC.
I'm mixing it, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
different.
yeah,
But you can't
yeah.
with headphones. You couldn't get away with the latency and everything else with what I'm doing to make it work that way. Like I just track something and it's not doesn't sound like one of my mixes yet. It takes, I
Mhm.
can't do that when the artist is listening through headphones through Pro Tools because it'll just push it too far back in time for them, for me
Oh,
to do all my routing and all the stuff I do. So I get it as
oh,
close as I can on the way in, and then once I get my template in, all the routing starts happening, everything will come to life a little more. But in a situation like you said, where you put those multi tracks up and the faders are there and it feels really good,
it's the groove. It's
any
nice.
any time that I get a song to come in and like that, and I go to mix, and I just my template starts with all the faders up, sort of at a good starting point. And if
Hmm.
I do that and I hit play and I make a couple of tweaks, and I'm like, wow, this feels like really good. Before I start doing anything, I'll print that. And this way, if I am overcooking it or if I did take a wrong direction, I know my first impression was this feels really good as
Hmm.
it is. So I can just, I have that on a external button on my console.
You can get
I can
back
A
there.
B. Yeah, I could just hit a button and I hear that. I have the way I set up my desk, I have one, two, three, four additional stereo mixes. So I can have four mixes lined up in time with what I'm working on and just A B with buttons. So
Wow.
let's say I have the live mix is number one, what I'm working on, whatever I don't mean live like it's a live record, but just the mix I'm working on. Two will be their rough mix, so I can just hit a button and that's lined up in time.
Right.
Three might be my initial impression that I printed, and then four will be whatever. If they said, "Hey, we like this song and this song and this song," I'll get those from Spotify and put them on a track, so I can just go.
Oh, okay, sure.
They wanted that snare. Is it in the ballpark to, I'm not trying to
Right.
copy it, but
Yeah.
at least I have like an idea, or we really like the way the low end is on this record. I can instantly level match A, B and go, I don't
Sure.
have enough low end yet, or I'm overdoing this. Let me back it off.
Yeah. I like that plug-in reference by mastering the mix. I put all my reference things right in there.
Yeah, that's sort of similar. I have I use that with, I have that plugin on one of those channels. So
Hmm.
I can take anything from my library and
Nice,
just put it, when I hit play, it goes, and I just hit a button on my desk and it
nice.
pops up.
Did you learn anything
So,
from Dave O'Donnell when you were over at Avatar?
you know,
He's
he
pretty
he
quiet about.
wasn't there he wasn't there a ton when I was there. I think
Oh,
he did a lot of his work there before me. He was there a few times, but I never worked with him.
okay.
Um, I definitely remember him being there for stuff, but I don't remember really being on any of those sessions. I don't even remember what it was for. That place was crazy. Every day, when it was busy, 4 or 5 rooms cooking, you could have so much stuff happening at once. That's sort of why I like being back in the studio again and not in my house. Because
Oh,
I
nice.
walk in, there's a studio on the first floor, studio on the second floor. I'm on the third floor.
That's
So you
exciting.
take a break, you go out to the lounge, you run into another engineer. Hey, what are you working on? What's going on? Oh, did you try this new thing? Check this thing out. And it's like being back in a creative community. It's sort of worth the price of admission to sort of just be,
Yeah,
especially after the whole lockdown situation, to be out and about every day and have a staff and, hey,
that's
can you guys run out and grab this? It's nice. It's nice to be back in a just a creative place.
it sounds like studios are going to start making a comeback for a lot of good reasons.
Yeah. I don't know like what the business model is to make them profitable because I don't know if they ever really were.
Oh,
I I mean, I'll probably be here for a few years, but I'm sure at some point I'll end up just building my own place. It's just probably gonna happen. Just
I thought
knowing.
that's what you had at your house. I thought that's what
I
that was
did,
about.
but it took over my house, and we needed the basement for my kids so they could kind of do
Okay,
their stuff. And I just wanted to, after the lockdown, I really felt like I wanted to get out of the house
I
just
see.
for a creative thing, just to be able to like make work work. I go there, I do it, I leave. It just gets me in a different headspace. Even just like with the like little interruptions or stopping or someone rings the
That's true.
doorbell. Like when I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone, and I would rather have 4 hours of being in a zone than 8 hours of like come and
Okay,
go.
sure.
Because my attention span is only so long anyway, and I find that like I'm only good to mix for like 6 hours, 8 hours tops.
Well, you get a good momentum going. You don't want to get pulled out of it.
Yeah, and I just like to walk away. I'm the type of
Yeah,
person like I always have a TV on in the background or other music going in the background. I like to hear a talking head or something just as a
yeah.
reference. If I'm mixing and mixing and mixing and you never hear anything else, like what if your vocal's super bright, but you have no other reference, right? If I've got the news or something stupid on in the background and I walk out to the lounge to go to the bathroom and I hear something that's not hyped up talking, and then I come back in and the vocals like taking your head off. I'm like, all right, I probably overdid it a little bit. So back it off. So I like having little cues like that, little distractions, but I also
Wow.
want to do my 4 or 5 hours while I'm in the zone, print it, and then listen to it on the way back to the studio the next day in the car or something, and go, all right, you got to fix the low end a little bit, or
Hmm.
it's too dark or it's too bright, and then I can just come in and do that and be done with it versus spending another 4 hours like tweaking a whole bunch of stuff that probably doesn't need to be tweaked just because my
Hmm.
brain's heard the thing too many times, and now you're
Yeah.
nitpicking stuff that no one's ever gonna hear.
Now
You know?
you have everything returning to the console all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because my setup is still split here. I can be completely in the box on that side of the room. I could be hybrid, or if I wanted to use the tape machine or Logic and the mixer, I could be totally on the console, but every song then has to be parsed out to the console, and I hate that part. You know, it's like if
That's
I had
why
just
I don't do analog anymore for that. I don't have an analog console. If I had a
oh,
tracking room, I would. There's no
yeah,
way. Like I work at a studio sometimes that doesn't have a console in their tracking room, and I'm just so used to having a large format board to grab stuff and tracking that if I had a
yeah,
tracking facility, I would probably get something like you have, but the bigger one,
yep,
the 24 or whatever, or 36.
yep.
Um, but the way that my setup is I have I cut it back. I was up to 96 channels of IO, and
Okay.
and the converters were starting to get a little crazy with the latency. It was things were starting to sound weird. So I knocked it back down to two converters. So I've got 64 channels, and all my gear behind me, it's through a patch bay, but it goes on the top row of the patch bay is the output of the converters. So I've got what 40 channels of inserts. So the top is the output of the converter. That goes into the next row of the patch bay, which is the input of the outboard gear. Then the next row is the output of the outboard gear, and then the next row is the input of the converter. And in Pro Tools, everything is labeled what every insert is. So they're there like a plugin for me. If I want 1176 number 4, I have it on an insert. But what I do for recall purposes is I have like this massive calibration template. So
Wow.
every channel of IO is on a 64 fader template that has a signal generator as the first plugin and the analog insert as the second plugin. In the
Wow.
comments section, I have what the gain reduction is and the level that it should be returning to in Pro Tools. I put Pro Tools in a calibration mode, and I can see down to a tenth of a dB what it should be. So if I look and on my Manly, it's 1 dB. So like minus 18 Pro Tools should have the compressor doing 1 dB of gain reduction and returning back to Pro Tools at minus 18. If the left is a little out from the right, I'll tweak it or whatever. But this is like I was talking about with the center imaging. Like I
Yeah.
get that all matched up, and then I don't touch the outboard gear.
Yeah.
Those are my settings. So then I can open or close any mix I want, and the recall comes up.
Oh, cool.
And
Yeah.
I'll print like my effects and stuff now. And I've been printing more actually since I
Yeah.
changed my setup back in January. I picked up that little SSL mixer,
Oh, cool.
and I built some mults into my patch base. So a lot of
Mhm.
times before I start a mix, I'll patch up one output to the mult, and then I'll mult that to like 6 different compressors, return those to the SSL, and then the left channel output of the SSL, I'll patch back into Pro Tools. I can send any source out to it, pick a compressor or a blend of compressors, record it back into Pro Tools, and use that as my starting point for whatever plugins or anything that goes
Oh,
on it
cool.
after.
And
So,
what converters you're using?
Antelope Orion 32s, the HD, the Pro Tools HDX models or whatever.
Okay.
I have 3 of them, but only really 2 of them are set up right now. Um, It'd probably be better if I had like an Avid brand converter, like a Matrix or something for the delay compensation. It's just the Orion for the money is a really great converter for 32 channels, and
Yeah.
anything else would be like double the price.
Well,
And
we'll have to get Avid to give it to you, that's all.
I was actually with those guys the other day. Avid has some good people. I know they can catch some flack sometimes with things, but I've always had a great relationship with them. They've been helping
Oh,
me out for years and years and years. I've been a Pro Tools user since like the late 90s,
wow.
and I pretty much don't use any other DAW at all.
Have you been back to Power Station now that it's part of Berklee, and do you know
No,
stuff about
I
it?
did a session there last probably 2017 or 18 was the last time I was there. I don't really know anyone that's part of the whole Berklee thing at all over there. So actually,
Oh,
one of my interns here now. He's a Berklee online student, but he's hasn't had like an invite or anything to go there yet. Um,
I can put you in touch with Steven Weber. He's the head of it all, and he's a good friend.
yeah, I'd love to go check it out someday. It's been
Me
years
too.
since I've been there, and it's like every time I went back there, it felt like I was going home. I spent every
Yeah.
week I'd spend 80 hours in that place for 4+ years.
Did you know Susie Hollander?
No, that must have been after me.
Yeah, I think she was around when Dave O'Donnell was there more. But
I was there like 2001 to
I think it was
2005.
just after her. Yeah. And right after I had visited. But I can remember listening to three albums that were out at the same time, Eric Clapton, Pat Metheny, and a Gary Burton album. And I'm in my living room at this little apartment I was living in, listening on a dinky stereo system. And I thought, there's something about all these albums that has a quality that sounds the same, that sounds amazing. What is going on? And they were all engineered by Rob Eaton at the power station.
Oh, so you're
I'm
talking about, are you talking about the 24 Nights, Eric
I'm like,
Clapton?
no, I think it was Journeyman. And I was like, oh
Oh,
my
he
God,
did that too. Yeah, Rob Eaton's
I can
great.
hear the room. I'm hearing the room. Like,
He
it was,
plays in Dark Store Orchestra now.
yeah, yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's a great player. He's a great guitar player.
Oh, I know.
But
Yeah.
all his stuff was great. All those guys. I mean, it was like watching, getting to see some of those guys come back. Larry Alexander, who did like the Huey Lewis stuff, and
Wow.
Jason Cursaro, who did, Power Station,
That's
and
what I miss about all the digital stuff is all the credits. I used to know everybody's name and follow their work, and now you have to do a lot of research.
yeah, that's a big problem for the industry in general. I always feel bad because it's like if I'm working with the band, I'm like, you mind if I post something? Because now when you put this record out, my
Nobody
name's
will
not
know
going
it
to
was
be on
you.
it anywhere unless it's on vinyl, and everyone does those as like limited releases. So, if you're only printing
Mhm.
out a couple thousand, no one's ever going to know that I
Yeah,
worked with you guys. And a lot of times I'm like, man, this record sounds great. Who did this? And I can't find out.
and it's you.
No, I wish. But it's frustrating, because I
Hmm.
feel everyone's working their butts off,
Yeah.
and that's how I found a lot of the studios and real, even when I was playing in local punk bands. Every cassette, every 7-inch, every CD had the studios in there, so you knew what were the good studios in town. And
Right.
back in the early '90s, especially, there was a big divide from like pro studio and what you know the local scene was, because local was, if it was good, you had a 1-inch 16 track.
That's what I have.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people had half-inch 16 tracks. That Tascam and those fostex machines were everywhere.
I
Or they
had the
had,
38. I had a half
yeah,
inch 38
yeah,
that I made my first album on. Yeah.
yeah, but that was sort of the level. Maybe you'd have a Soundcraft console if you were lucky. And most a lot
Studio
of times it
Masters.
was a lot of times it was a Tascam console,
Hmm.
and those were the $35 to $50 an hour studios. There was no Neve Mike Pre's or
Yeah,
LA2A clones. It was like you're lucky if there was a DBX 160 and an Alesis reverb.
I
And
know.
so you had to find the guys that did your type of music, that were good at your music. So
At
if you
that
listen
level,
to a
yeah.
lot of local music, you would look through, oh, this one was done at this studio. These guys are only 35 minutes away from us. Maybe we should go here, listen to this thing they did. And
Hmm.
now, how does anyone, even if you are the guy who's really good and a local guy, maybe you haven't had the opportunity to have big artists in your studio or go to a studio to work on a big artist. How does anyone know you're making these cool records? How does anyone know?
Yeah.
If no one's listening to him because 6,000 million songs are getting released every day, and even though you got lucky and worked with some really great artists who wrote really great music and it sounds really great, like if 1,000 people hear it and none of them are musicians
Yeah.
and none of them know the artist to ask, hey, who did your record? It sounds really great. I'd like to go there. How do they know?
It's too
They
many people
don't,
to know. They don't know, yeah.
and I don't know really because I'm too old, but I don't know if the local music scenes with younger kids, how much interaction there is. I mean, well, I was really fortunate. The scene that I was in
Mm,
at the time in the mid 90s, early 90s was like huge. A local show would have 1,000 kids or 500 kids
wow.
at it. And, there'd be 5 or 6 bands playing, but you all talked.
Mhm.
So, oh, who pressed your records? They sound really good. Or who did your merch? Those t-shirts look great, and there was like, it's
Right.
funny. I was listening to a podcast about that, because there's a podcast about everything. And so I was listening to a podcast about my local scene that a couple of guys did, and the one guy who used to throw shows, used to throw a lot of shows. And back then we would rent out like Knights of Columbus and American Legion halls, and those were a lot of our venue. The cafeteria at the community college, like that's the sort of stuff our scene was in. And this guy said, yeah, when I used to throw these shows, I was 16 years old, living at my parents' house. And back then there was no MapQuest, so you'd write on the flyer, call for directions. So on show day, my mom would be answering the phone all day saying, you got to make a left at the quick check and turn right, and so analog, there was none of this stuff, but it was everyone talked. You could, talk to all of these different people and learn something, figure out who the best engineer was, figure out who the good live sound guy was to hire.
Mhm.
I don't know how much that exists or doesn't exist anymore with social media. It's not as personable, probably.
Thankfully, there's still word of mouth, I guess, and people are still people, but yeah, there's so many technologies and things that are helpful and so many things that are getting in the way, and we just use our creative best to navigate what works for us, I guess, like everything else.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love technology. I don't want to make a record on tape. I have no interest in any of that. I'm fine. I wish I could do bounce to disc. That's sort of, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm pretty digital on everything else.
You mean disc like CD disc?
No, like just not having to print my mixes in real time because I'm using analog.
Oh, 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 oh.
I would love to be able to like do that whole Andrew
Bounce.
Shep's bounce butler thing and like print all my mixes overnight while I'm not here and not have to do them in real time, especially because I work with a lot of jam bands. So,
Yeah.
we've got I do a lot of 30-minute songs and 20-minute songs, and you got to sit through the whole print. And then my problem with that is I'm listening to QC it, but then
Mm,
I'm always hearing something I want to change.
gotta
So
start
it's
again.
like I've got to keep my hand off the button to stop, if it's like 15 minutes in, like don't touch it, just leave it alone. It's fine. They're going to be happy. And
Next week,
I, I
forget you even wanted to make that change.
yeah, well, that's the thing, I always, I think a lot of us do the same thing where we worry about something that bugs us about the mix. Like something
Yeah.
was bugging me about the mix today, and the artist came in, didn't mention it, didn't mention a thing about it.
Good.
So it's like
Yeah.
I might hear it, but they don't. But the thing they hear might be more important that I missed. So
Mhm.
I'm looking for their input. Um, the artist is usually right. So I usually, if I'm off, they usually, whatever they, I end up find if they're like, pull this up, bring this down, it usually locks it into place. And
Fix
it
it.
could be like
Yeah.
one or two little things. Like you've got everything cooking really good.
Mhm.
And then they come in and it's like, hey, can I just, it's finished.
It's because they know the arrangement. They know what their intention was. They've been playing it or practicing it together, and something's still a little masked or whatever, and that little
And
bit is good.
I'm fortunate, I guess, where, so many of us don't really do attended mixing anymore.
Oh, I
Right?
wouldn't.
I mean,
I would definitely attend if someone else was mixing.
well, most of the time, most of us just get an email with files and a link and we download it,
Mm.
we mix and we send it out, we wait for notes.
Well, yeah, I guess if you have a rough
That
mix, you're good.
Yeah, if you got or you talk I talk to the I always talk to the artist ahead, but what I guess I was getting at is with NBC, the artist is still coming through. So a lot of times I have them in the room with me actually listening, going over the mix and if there's a piece of advice I could give to anyone, especially people who haven't had a lot of experience in this modern age of attended mixes,
Mm.
you don't need to tell the artist everything you did.
So you
Don't
definitely don't.
don't try to impress them with, I put this compressor on the snare and then because they're going to be thinking about the stupid snare drum and not the song.
Yeah.
And then you're going to end up having to do all these recalls. I come in,
Yep.
introduce myself, say hello, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And I hit play. And if they got something to say, they're going to say it. But if I tell them, well, I put this cool delay on your guitar, so
Then they're
your
gonna be like,
guitar's pan here, but there's a delay over here. Now
take
they're
it
not
off,
listening to the
take it off.
song. It's not even that. They're listening for that thing, and they're not even listening to the important part anymore. That stuff is all just like crap we do to make it better. And yes,
Mhm.
it can make it better and bigger or more whatever emotional or whatever you're looking for. But they should be looking back with the widest landscape and seeing the big picture and
Yeah.
not being you shouldn't put them in the technical weeds because you're just going to bury yourself
The
sometimes,
technical weeds.
you
Oh
know.
my God, I was in such technical weeds finishing up my last CD, Snowcake. I was like chasing my tail and going around in circles with second guessing a million things. It was almost a bad experience at the end because I was getting to teach music production and engineering classes at Berklee, and I thought, wow, now I'm in this mastering suite, and now I'm in this studio, and now I'm in that. Let me take my mixes in here and check it out. And I was trying to make changes based on what I thought those speakers were telling me because I thought I was in professional facilities rather than just being at home. And I was going insane. And when I mentioned this to one of my classes, a couple of my students went, "Oh God, no, don't trust any of these studios because they've been having trouble recently. And this thing happened and they changed this
No, no.
driver and they didn't change the other driver and now they're not in sync." And I was like, "Oh my God, no wonder." I was like, I'm always trying to trust my ears, but I thought for a second, okay, well, this is real. This is real
This-
information. And it wasn't.
I the first record that I produced on my own went on for like way too long, like 8 or 9 months, and like it was going and going and going. And it was great. We had a great time doing it. It wasn't like it was a bad thing. It took a long time. And I remember I finished the mixing and we went to Sterling to have it mastered when they were still downtown in Chelsea. And it's like,
Wow.
the best mastering room in town. And we got done with the master and went to the car and I hated it.
Oh
I
no.
I I thought I hated it, and it just didn't sound right to me, and I was just too deep in it, and
From,
it was
yeah.
just too deep in it from 8 months of, like, hearing it here and hearing it there and doing a million overdubs, and I was too close to it,
Oh,
and it was
definitely.
like, now I hear it and I'm like, "It sounds fine," I mean, yeah, could it be better? Yeah, if I did it today, it'd be a lot better. But for what it is at the time, it sounds fine. And whatever I was pissed off about or really upset about, I mean, I remember being like really mortified, like, oh man, like I fucked this up. They spent all this time, 8 months. It just doesn't sound. And
Wow.
the band was like, this sounds great. And I'm like, no, it's not right. And it's just sometimes
Makes
you,
you crazy.
you just gotta, that's why I like to do shorter spans of time. I don't get
Smart.
bogged down. I got rid of all the extra speakers in my room. I've
Really, you're
got
just using one set of
I got one
monitors?
set of monitors. If I get fatigued on these, I've got the aura tones that'll pop up for a little while. But I've kind of switched off where I'm a firm believer in just getting to know one set of speakers and not confusing yourself.
What are you
And
using?
vocals,
Oh, sweet.
yeah, the three ways, the trios, and I
Nice.
got that and Trinov. And my room was designed by Francis Mandela, who was a great
Mm,
studio designer. So the room was pretty good to begin with, and then I spent quite a bit of time tuning it um, with speaker
nice.
placement and sub and crossover and all that. And
Yeah.
then once I got it really close, then I did the Trinov, and then tweaked from there. I'd see like what the trend off needed to do, and then I adjust the sub level and the crossover level until I made the trend off do the least amount of stuff it had to do.
Mm,
And I just basically listen to this one set, and
that's
I,
awesome.
I mean, like my recalls have gone down to almost none. Like it's really been the last since the beginning of this year when I got the trend off, or the end of last year. I did the trend off, and then I got the focals, and since then it's so I haven't had. I don't think I've had a comment on low end,
Oh, that's amazing.
like not one, which was always like always
Question mark.
an issue. I mean, it's like been tiny little things. Can you bring this up a little?
Yeah, like
Like,
more arrangement stuff rather than correction.
yeah, I've yet to get, it's too bright or it's too dark or the vocal's too loud. I've been really fortunate since I got the monitoring correct. And that's like the biggest challenge. I wish more people had
Yeah,
interest in that than the plugins.
I
Because
know.
it's like you can ask me about any plugin, I'll tell you go put this plugin on. But if you don't know what you're listening to,
Yep.
you should, instead of spending the time watching plugin reviews, you should be watching Carl Tatz videos on acoustics and studio design and just
Yeah,
basic things like where to place your speakers.
which comes
Because
back to real recording techniques to begin with, because it's not about just dropping and adding little files that someone else recorded. If you're making real music, you're recording the instruments yourself, and you've got to figure out what sounds good.
and yeah, that I'm always mortified when I see these people that like take couch cushions and things and make these like vocal box. I don't know if you've ever seen these things. There are people build these like vocal booths, and I've gotten so many vocals like that, and it's just like you've got all sorts of stuff,
Yeah,
that you have to filter out and notch
yeah,
out because of all these short reflections. I would rather have it breathe and have a little echo in there than
okay.
have that thing where it's just the feel. Like when you go into a studio that's really dead and you walk in the room, it just feels like the air sucked out of the room.
Yeah.
Like during the pandemic, I was getting stuff that people were recording in closets. And, one time I was struggling with this vocal for like an hour. And I'm like, man, like the resonance and all this stuff. And I'm trying everything Soothe and all these other plugins. Finally, I'm like, is this guy wearing a mask?
Oh my
I
God.
called the band up. I go, did you guys record vocal through a mask? Oh yeah, he forgot to take his mask off in the second chorus or whatever it was. And
Oh.
it's like, well, that's what I'm here because I can't hear, and it was so yeah, acoustics
So
to
funny.
me are that and room setup and speaker placement and getting, if you've got like one crappy set of speakers and a Focusrite interface and a 57 and an overly hyped cheap Chinese condenser mic, like your room placement and the sound of your source is what matters the most. The
Mhm.
intonation of your guitar. Have you changed the tubes in your amp? Did you tune the
Mhm.
drums first? Did you like listen to the drum? I know, yes, you recorded in a garage, but did you just put the drums where there was a clear space, or did you walk around and like try, maybe the spot that you didn't think the drums would sound best in sounds best in. So put them there because you're got a disadvantage because you got a cheap Focusrite interface and a cheap mic.
Yep.
So if you get all those other things in play, you can make drums sound good with one or two mics, and that was done a million times, but we all know like Ringo knew how to play into those mics, Yeah, exactly. They knew how to what spot in the studio to put him in that he was going to sound the best. It's not like they had all these doodads and plugins and phase alignment and tape emulation, and they had their two mics and a Fairchild, and they plugged it through that, and Ringo knew how to play to that. The parts were written great around the songs,
Mhm.
and that's all you needed.
Yep.
Now if you start at the arrangement, get the arrangement right, then figure out where you are in the room or whatever you got to deal with, and your monitoring is right, you can actually hear that. You're taking your $200 worth of equipment and making it sound like 10,
Yeah,
just versus the other guy who didn't do his homework.
right. That's always
And
the case. A better engineer can take any gear and make it sound better than most of us with tons of gear.
a lot of times it's really, is it a better musician? Because if it's a better musician, then, I remember I got to record a band. I probably was maybe just turned 20, and I got a night at Power Station where the room was empty and the manager said I could bring a band in, and I brought a friend's band in who was like really good. And, I copied what I saw all these great engineers do, and I used the same gear and everything. And first of all, it's Power Station, and second of all, it's the Neve, and third of all, it was a good band. Like that combination of all those things, I thought I was a great engineer. It's like, this is easy. Yeah, put the faders up. Yeah, I'm the next Al Schmitt. Here we go. Um, and then whatever it was, a couple of months later, another friend's band was going to come
Hmm.
in, and they were terrible. And I did the same setup, and I thought, this is going to be easy. Let me put my feet up and show these guys how good I am. And it sounded like terrible. It sounded horrible. The drummer was horrible. He didn't know how to tune his drums. He couldn't play to the room. The arrangements weren't good, and it sounded bad.
You were capturing exactly what was there. It wasn't you.
Exactly. So I'm just a firm believer in like we can always make things incrementally bigger and better, but it's got to start with a good source.
Yeah.
And a great drummer can make any drum kit sound good.
Yeah.
A bad drummer can't make a great drum kit sound good.
No.
Same
Same with
thing with a
guitar player.
guitar or strings or vocals or anything else. Yes, and auto tune can put a singer in tune. Does that make it a good vocal?
Yeah, it won't give you goosebumps necessarily if they're not connected to what they're
But
doing.
but a great singer who sings a little out of tune with the emotion there, you don't even want to touch it. It's great. Or
Yeah.
maybe they do want a little tuning, but it's just a little bit to fix this note and it's not lined up to create and cut up. And it's like, okay, the artist feels more comfortable because that little bit of pitch is fixed and they feel more confident in their performance. And you can't even tell there's auto tune in there because it was, or melodyne because it was a slight
Mm-hmm.
little thing, but it's their performance and it's them and it feels good,
Awesome.
you know?
Feel, groove, real people, real music, real instruments.
Yeah, pocket and groove, that's
Yeah.
so important. And that's something that the other thing that I really focus on is intent.
Yeah.
As a musician, specifically with drums, but with really any instrument. Drums, especially because it's multi-mic'd most of the time. You're As soon as we start moving faders and turning pan knobs,
Mm,
we're altering the drummer's intent,
that's
right?
true. Yeah.
Unless you're going to place perfectly one mic in the room that's in the perfect spot and they're playing to it,
Mm,
we are altering their dynamics no matter what, just by putting a blending microphones,
true.
because we're creating a fake image that wasn't there. So then you get into, well, I want my snare to be brighter, so I got to turn the brightness up. Oh, now the cymbal's washy, so I got to gate it. And now all of a sudden the ghost strokes are gone and it's stiffer and you're just get choo choo cha instead of do. So
Yeah.
then, so we're altering by everything we do with all the compression and all the gating and all of the samples, all the stuff we do. So I'm always trying to go back like I do with printing and mix to like the one mono mic and trying to in my brain like, okay, I know we need more low end because this is a rock thing or a pop thing and he doesn't hit the kick that hard, but I'm gating that, but now I'm losing the feel on the bounce off the snare. So how can I gain that back? How can I what can I do to bring that groove back into it while keeping the impact in the
Mm,
punch and make it feel consistent, but not make it not feel like the drummer. He's a personality. His playing is his personality.
mm.
And you start compressing something or getting something, you're changing and altering his personality. how he leans into the one on the turnaround. If you're
Mm,
compressing it, it's not leaning as hard.
right.
Maybe he's playing a little behind the beat, but what you're doing with the compressor is making it groove a little faster, so it feels like he's rushing now.
Mm,
And that wasn't his intent. He was playing leaning back for a reason. So you have to think about all of everything you do, the intent, and okay, yes, we have to alter the drummer because that's what the song calls for. That's what the sonic calls for. That's what the genre calls for. But try to keep in mind where he's at because
mm.
he's got to listen to it and it's his performance and he's got to live with it forever. I'm going to go on to my next album and he's going to live with this forever. And this might be his only album he ever makes.
Wow,
So I want it to feel like he feels like what I did is there or what I did, but even better
right?
is there. I don't want him to feel like, man, I don't know, the drums don't sound like they did in the room. Or I don't hear the ghost strokes on the snare on this part, or the articulation of the way I'm opening the hi-hat on the third India beat, like whatever
Mm.
it is that we start to do these things and it starts to alter all of that.
Oh, I know. I have wrecked a lot of my grooves. And I was playing the drums. It was like
That's why I don't play the drums because it's not much of a groove.
and then I put the compressor on in the wrong place, and it's like, "What
Yeah,
happened?"
yeah, it's same thing. The relationship with any instrument, if it might be the acoustic guitar is part of the strumming is part of the rhythm, right?
Mm,
And that's working with the snare. But
yeah.
then you notice they're clashing. So then maybe you were looking into, well, I want the acoustic to feel like it's leading. So
Mm,
maybe I'll back off the attack on the acoustic guitar and let the
mm,
compressor grab after the initial peak. And then I'll go to the snare drum and maybe I'll pull down the initial peak and let the ring happen. And then
mm,
they stop masking each other and they start working together.
mm.
Or, the bass needs to feel like it's a little more on top of the beat. So let me bring the release or the attack back on that so that first note jumps out and it feels like he's ahead of the kick drum a little bit. Or
Yeah.
vice versa. I want him to feel like he's behind. So let me take some of that attack out. And now when he hits that first note, it's going to compress and then the sustain's going to come up at the same time when the kick's hitting. If I do that attack later, that's going to feel like it's ahead of the bass now a little bit. I mean, not much. We're talking like microseconds or milliseconds, but
Enough to make it feel like the intention was right and it's in a pocket.
yeah, a lot of times if a
Mhm.
song
Yeah.
feels like it's dragging, I'll try to do something to make it feel like it's moving a little faster
Mm.
without, tempo changing things or pitch altering or, just
Or
with
setting everything to the grid and doing a time
I'm
align.
talking just with compression
I
and
know.
limiting and just
That's what I'm complimenting, yes.
trying to make everything groove in that way where maybe
Everything
the drums are releasing a little faster so it feels like he's moving a little more, or you want it to sound sluggish so they're not releasing faster and it's taking time for the compressor to get back on that groove
Mm,
on the next attack. So it almost feels like the drummer's behind a little.
mm,
And then if you're doing the opposite with the acoustic guitar, now it feels like the acoustic's leading and the drums are laying back, if that's what you want.
right.
It's all off a feel and again what the artist is looking for.
So cool. I love what we do. It's just so crazy cool. But you, my goodness,
I don't know about that. I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. It's a mystery.
it's so great. And gosh, it's so cool to meet you, Matteo, and to, give me some time like this and to chat to everybody and tell us some of the things that you really feel is a really cool
Well,
opportunity.
thanks for asking me to do it. I mean, it's been a
Thank
lot of fun
you.
talking, and no one should take anything I say too seriously because I don't know what I'm doing. I just make it up every day, and yeah, if you get any cool ideas from it, awesome. I'm glad I can help, but I'm sure there's other people that do it a completely different way too, and their version might be cooler or it might not be, but you should try to pick up all of them.
Yes, got to see what fits all of us, fits any of us. Yeah. I can remember being very young and listening to different people tell me this is how you do this or that. And it wasn't even about recording, just life or, how to walk. You know, I'm making stuff up now, but it's like I can remember in my head going, that works for you, but that's not going to work for me. Like I can remember being like 7, 8 years old going, I have my own ideas and I have my own I'll take a little of this, but I want a lot of that, and I want this over here instead. And it always surprised me in my head because I'd be giving them the yes,
Well,
but I know I'd
that's
be doing something else.
yeah, and I think that that's the dangerous part about the internet. Some people really believe what they do is the only way,
Mm,
and it's just not, or it's the right way. And I'm a firm believer that there is no real right or wrong way. If
mm.
putting all the faders all the way up to like +10 sounds good, then that's what you do. If having them all down at -20 is good, that's what you do. There's no, if you put distortion on everything, it sounds great, do it. If you want it super clean and that sounds great, do it. There's no, I love just as much to hear like the Joe Cocker Bad Dogs and Englishmen record, which to me sounds like the tape machine's about to catch on fire. It's so hot and explosive. It's just like everything is, and like it sounds amazing, but at the same time, like, you know, I love hearing those early 90s Joe Jackson records that have that kind of bright, pristine tone that's a different energy,
Mm.
but just as good in a different way. So there's so many different takes on it, so many every day
Yeah.
I want to do something different.
Well, I think that's a really great point because I've always thought it's a gigantic playing field and anything goes. So even when I would say to someone, I'm just really trying to get good at this, I really want to make it sound better. And they go, what's good? What's better? And it's like, okay, well, here are my reference mixes. This is what I'm after. And then some people say, that's never going to happen because you don't have $50,000 microphones and preamps and pieces of gear and
But that's
1,000
bullshit.
years experience and you're not this one or that one. And it's like, but there's a lot closer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where there's a lot
Yeah.
of information missing between what I'm doing versus what someone else is doing. And a good teacher, I think, could be able to tell you what that is. Because I can tell people what that is with guitar in a heartbeat.
Somewhat, I think, but then I think sometimes we'll like, you know, back in the 70s, U47s weren't $50,000 microphones,
Right.
right? And like Jimmy Iovine was like 22 or something when he was producing Tom Petty. So
Yeah.
maybe you don't need 30 years of experience and $50,000 microphones to make it happen.
Good point.
Those were only like $2,000 microphones back then, and he was 2 years out of school, so or whatever it was. It was a young guy, and there's a lots of examples like that.
Yeah.
So while
True.
yes, I'm glad I have the experience now, and I definitely know more. I don't think that should scare anyone away because they don't, or that their product would be any
Mm,
less for it.
right.
If the pursuit's the pursuit, and if you find it,
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you've got 50 years experience or 5 weeks. If it's got it, it's got it. If the music's good, you'll figure out a way to make it translate.
I was bouncing back and forth from cassette deck to cassette deck. I was like, you know, 16 going, wow.
Yeah, my first setup was we had the boom box with the microphone in it. So I would record guitar into the microphone, and then I put that tape in another boom box and play that while I put another tape in the first boom box and recorded that while playing along to the other one. So it was like cassette tape on cassette tape
Exactly.
through the boombox limited mic that's like, it's got that sort of crazy. You hit the first note, you just hear the kind of kick
14
in.
tracks of noise.
Yeah,
Tons of tape hiss.
back and forth, back and forth.
I
Yep,
still
yeah.
have that tape. It's fascinating.
I still have all my 4 tracks. Um, from the 90s, and I about 10 years ago bought a 4-track on eBay for like 50 bucks. It's crazy. Now they're like 300 bucks again.
You can
But
hear them.
but in like 2005 or 10 or something, I bought the same 4-track that I had, a fostex, and that one happened to have direct outs on it.
Nice.
So I transferred all my tapes to like Pro Tools 15 years ago or 10
Yeah.
years ago, whatever it was, and I haven't ever listened to them again. But at least I know they're there. Hopefully the hard drive they're on still spins.
I know I made that first album, Among the Ruins, with my band Too True on a half-inch Tascam 38. And we brought it to Toby Mountain's place to get mastered. And Jonathan Wyner was just learning then. And he mastered it. And we thought for sure they were just going to send us home, like, go home, kids, because this was done on toys. And Toby said, it's amazing what people are doing in their rooms these days or in their houses. And that was 1989, you know.
Yep.
Now everybody's recording at home, you know. And there were people recording at home long before I started doing it because there was that book, How to Make and Sell Your Own Record. When I was, just like 10 years old, I had that book, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely come a long way. You can do a lot more now, but there's definitely something for the simplicity of what it used to be. And
I,
there's something about learning that way too. You have to,
yeah,
I had 4-track, and then I got a little sub mixer.
yes,
And at the time, Sam Ash was like running these deals where like they had all these CAD microphones. They must have gotten like a million of these things as part of a deal. So it's like buy a set of guitar strings, get a CAD microphone for free. So by like the end of one summer, I had like 12 of these CAD bad 58 knockoff mics.
nice.
And so then I got this sub mixer, and I'm like, I can mic up all my drums now. So I had all the drums going through the sub mixer, and it was stereo out sub mixer. So I just pan everything to the left and take the 1/4 inch left out and plug it into the 4-track. So then I'm like, I've got multi-mic drums on my 4-track. This is great. And
Wow.
then I got another 4-track. So I would do the drums in stereo and lay 2 guitars down, mix that together, bounce that to the other 4-track, add bass in the guitar solo, mix that, add that back to the other 4-track, and then I had 2 left for vocals.
Nice.
And I would do all my effects with guitar pedals.
That's great.
And that was, but
Yeah.
that's all you had. There was no, and I appreciate that I was able to do that with high and low EQ and no, I think now when all these guys ask me like, well, what plugin should I use on this? And should I get this dynamic EQ? And I'm like, I had high and low EQ. And it took me a long time to figure that out. So like maybe just get a 2-band EQ and just work with that for a little while. And when you get that, then graduate to the next thing because there's so many choices. I think people get like paralyzed.
Oh,
Oh,
definitely.
like, should I
Definitely.
use this? Should I use that? I'm like, I never even thought about that. Like, there
Yep.
was either like you turn the reverb pedal on or off. Do you want it on the snare drum or not? And that was it. And I was doing old school, miking the toms underneath, and because the first studio I started at was like a total 70s thick shag carpet everywhere, dead,
I
super
was reading
dead
that, yeah.
16-track studio, and it just had that. That's how they did everything. Sounded like 70s disco drums, super tight. They had a cinder block in the kick drum, and
Wow.
everything had that thud on the snare, and that's how I learned how to do everything initially. So that's, even though I was doing punk stuff, it was like I'm pulling the bottom heads off the toms, and I didn't realize that was already, this was the early 90s. So I didn't realize that was already like out of fashion. Yeah, that's just what I did. I always thought it sounded pretty good.
But yeah,
Um,
I don't necessarily care what's in fashion. I never did for, you know, clothes, hair, music. It's like it's new to you, you're experimenting with it, you're getting something great out of it. It's a new song. So even if though it's got an old technique, it's like when George Harrison said uh that they wanted to use the 6/9 chord, the major 6/9 chord on She Loves You, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. They're singing all these different notes, making this beautiful chord. And George Martin saying, Lads, that's very corny and it's very trite and it's mundane and that was from the 40s, like it's old hat, it's a cliche. And George is like, we don't care, we like it, So they brought that thing back and everybody went crazy over it again. I mean, a good thing is a good thing. So yeah, I was just about to take my bottom heads off recently because I've never done it.
I haven't
And then I
done
was
that.
gonna get some calf skins
Well,
after that.
there you go. I mean, back then I didn't know that it was. I mean, I knew
No, it
my
was a thing.
toms. Well, I knew my toms didn't sound like what the records I was listening to, so I thought I was doing something wrong. They actually sounded
Yeah,
warmer and fuller. And at the time in like the mid '90s, everything had a lot of attack on it, especially with heavy music. It was a lot of like
yeah,
scooped out low mids and attack, and like I had this doom kind of thuddier sound, and you know
yeah.
kind of wonder
And
now what that would sound like if I went back and listened, if it'd be cool
then
or
if you've
not.
seen any of the pictures, you see that the bottom heads are off. You're going, I don't know where they're getting those cracking sounds. That's great. Yeah, super
Yeah,
cool.
so many different things you can do.
Totally. Did we not get to something that you were really wishing you wanted to tell folks, or any particular tips or things, like something that was earth shattering to you when you finally learned it with compression or EQ or
Oh, I'm still learning compression every day. So, I mean, that's something I think that's just a lifelong journey. I think
I think
every,
everybody feels that way. Yeah.
I think like I've always thought I understood it. I guess it just gets more in depth as you get old. I would say just if you're trying to learn compression, sit there with one source. Like I remember like in the mornings when I would clean up at power station, they used to have those old Yuri clicks in the room, that god awful click. And I would just patch that into different compressors. Be like,
Wow.
okay, the 160 does this to the attack.
Oh
The
wow.
1176 does this to the release. And like I would just start. So you could do that with plugins now, and it's easy. Once you get comfortable, I mean, I would always say start with like the stock stuff and just master it on everything so you know what it sounds like. But
Yeah.
then take the one plugin and try it on every single source.
Yeah.
Learn what a DBX 160 does on every single source. Learn what a Fairchild does on every single source. And that's how you sort of build up that index card in your head of, okay, I need something that pumps in a certain way. Let me go to the compacts because I know
Mm.
from just trying it on everything. Or, one time I tried sticking this compressor on a vocal and it sounded like crap, but for this vocal, it could work. If you don't have, and you try it and go, yeah, that's perfect. But if you don't do those experiences of trial and error and not on the artist dime, where you're trying to mix for them, like just on your own, download multi tracks, you
Yeah.
know. I always tell the guys that work with me when they ask me stuff, it's like, you got to mix every day
Mm.
because if you're not, trust me, someone else out there is. So if you want to get, I come in on my free time when I'm not getting paid to try stuff. And I've been doing this a long time. So there's plenty of
Mhm.
people just as crazy out there as me. So if you really want to get good and do this, I don't care if you're assisting all day for 10 hours. You better go home and mix on your Pro Tools rig at night. Because I'm getting in a mix today. How are you going to get better than me if you're not getting in a mix today? And I'm not saying it's a competition. I'm just saying if
Yeah.
you want to get better, like when I would assist guys, or I would do like the backups. Back then we used to do the data tape backups overnight and all that sort of stuff back in the,
Sure.
what was it, AIT or whatever they call it, ATI. But I would make, I wasn't supposed to do this. I guess their avatar's out of business now, so I can't get in trouble. But I would make DVD backups of whatever sessions. And I would just take it home in my little Pro Tools rig in my grandparents' basement and try to mix those songs. And I compare it to the guy mixing who
Wow.
mixed on the SSL all day. And that was after being there for 10 hours and taking an hour and a half bus ride home. And I'm not trying to say I, walked barefoot through the snow and all that stuff. I'm just saying if you really want to do this stuff, you got to want to do it that bad that you're willing to like work on it all day and then go home and try to take what you learn and apply it.
Mm.
Like, don't wait for someone to hire you to do it because it's not going to be great.
Mhm.
do as much on now these days you can download a million multi-tracks for free online and there's pure mix and produce like
Mhm.
a pro. When I was tuning my room, I was downloading tracks just to check out. Or if I get an idea for a concept and I don't like to remix stuff. I'm not a big
Mhm.
fan of that. Once I mix it, I've mixed it. I don't want to see it again. So
Yeah.
I'll ask another engineer, hey man, can you give me one of your sessions? I got this idea. I want to try something. Because
Yeah.
I love doing it and I love coming up with different concepts. Or, one day you might hit the wrong button or put the wrong plugin on. It gives you an idea for something. You say, all right, I can't work on that now. I gotta get this mix done, but I'm going to come in next week. I got Tuesday. I don't have anything booked. I'm going to come in and figure this out, figure out if I can make
Yeah.
something out of this. So if you
Mm.
have no experience and you're not doing that, you
Yeah.
should be, because that's what's going to separate, the great guys from the guys that are like hobbyists.
Right. And I
It's
love that advice of seeing what each piece of gear would do on different sources. I remember getting my first piece of gear, which was like an SPX 90 in the 90s, and setting up a microphone, an acoustic guitar, a bass, and a guitar, and going through all the presets and see what it would do to it. And I made a cassette and talked and played whatever came to mind, and it's hilarious. And it was wonderful. And they had like little booklets. Here's all Phil Collins sounds, and here's all
yeah.
you know, whatever engineers were doing things in those days, playing with these pieces of gear and giving you advice. And it was like, oh, save that as a preset, my own user preset, because that was a good one. And
I would do that even without source material. Like when I was coming
yeah.
up, like I said, when I go to clean the rooms, I take the oscillator on the SSL or the click track. And if you turn the oscillator on the SSL from 1K to whatever it is, 100, it makes a little clicking noise when you do that. So that's how
Mm.
I would learn reverbs and delays.
Oh,
I
wow.
would you hear the thing and then you'd figure out by controlling the feedback, you plug it in, you'd put that oscillator, patch it on a channel or the click track and patch it on a channel and then patch the aux send to whatever reverb you're playing with.
Mm-hmm.
And this way, because a lot of time back then, but they didn't have Pro Tools in every room.
Mm-mm.
And you didn't really want to mess with the tape machine, especially in the middle of an artist session. So, but I would plug that in, or if there was no sessions going on or no tape in there, and just say, oh, okay, this reverb has the chamber sounds like this plate sounds like this. Oh, I
Wow.
always hear about this gated reverb thing, so let me insert that drummer gate on the return of this analog plate.
Nice.
And then, oh, okay, so they say about the decay of Studio A is like zero point 0.8 milliseconds. Let me get the gate release to be that, and let me see if I can make it, and do that sort of stuff. And I did that all with click
Right.
tracks and oscillator tones, and then like
Wow.
learned what it sounded like to do like, a ping pong delay by sending it back to itself and all
Right.
that stuff just by hearing clicks going tick 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 tick. And so I
Figuring
was
that out.
already building that index card system in my head of like, yeah, I know now from hearing the tone generator going through the PCM42, when you turn the rate down, you turn the rate real slow and the depth up, and and you hear all
Yeah.
these. So I know if I want something to do that, like it's built in from just doing that stuff. So you can
Yeah.
do that in Pro Tools for free,
Wow.
and it doesn't have to be
Wow.
mixing a track. It can just be learning the stuff before you mix the track or learning what the headroom is. It's like when you used to go into a new room with a console you didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
you'd kind of have to play with the level and learn the sweet spot of that model desk if you hadn't worked on it, like you could
Definitely.
push a 4K more than the 9K, or the Neve you could really push, and those EQs did something different than the SSLs, and that was like by just doing it and learning it and not doing it on someone else's dime where yeah, I got this, don't worry about it. You're putting in the time on your own, searching it out. And that's the type of thing that you could be an intern running for someone all day and then still go home and do that at night. And like, I'm just a firm believer, and you got to mix every single day.
Yeah, it's like playing every day. Just gotta
It's just
sing
like
every day,
playing the
play every
guitar.
day.
Same
Yeah.
thing. If you don't do it every day, someone else is.
You feel it slip.
Yeah, I mean, I try. I don't I don't think a day's gone by in like forever. I mean, just a vacation day here or there, but I'm behind a console every single day, just about.
Wow.
And it's just reps. It's just getting in the reps.
It's a fine way to live, actually.
I like it, you know.
Yeah. I remember going to Wurlitzer's music store in Boston with my keyboard player saying, "We want to buy a gate. We needed to buy a gate for the studio." It was when everything was analog. And the guy's going, "What do you want a gate? What are you trying to do?" Like, we didn't realize it was gated reverb to get that sound. We got to buy a gate.
Well, it's funny because I do all my gated reverb with a gate. I don't use a gated reverb preset. I have a gate after the reverb.
Yeah, do your own reverb. Yeah,
I actually have another one that has the gate before the reverb, so I can control what goes into it,
sure.
and it kind of dampens down. That's
Nice.
a bigger reverb that I have with a lot longer pre-delay.
You
And it
could
kind
probably sell your template on your webpage and make a fortune.
no one would be able to figure out how to use it. It's not even that. It's not complicated. It's just like one of those things that you got to make your own. And it's funny. Pure Mix put out Michael Brower's template,
I know.
and,
I've
and I
downloaded many of them.
I took a look at it, and I was like, "This is awesome. This is awesome for Michael. Michael knows how to use this.
Exactly.
My template is awesome for me. I know how to use it. I know where to push the faders up to make it start to do its thing.
Yeah.
He's intimate with his and he knows his way. His way is his way. You can cop some ideas from that and some concepts, and I sure as hell do. But there's no way I could sit down and put wave files into his template and make it sound like anything.
I
And if
know.
someone tried to take mine, like it's the same thing. They could figure it out, but it's not going to sound like what I do with it. Not that I'm saying what I do with it is great. I'm just saying it's like that's my tool.
Right.
That's
Right.
how I get around. You should spend the time learning the processes to create your own master tool that's going to work for
Yeah.
you.
I know I've worked with a couple of different templates of my own and keep changing my mind and then keep adding more gear and figuring out there's so many different ways to work and wow, have I made things really complicated. How do I want to work now? Because sometimes it's like, I just want to write a song and record it. What are you doing? Because I hooked up everything myself and it's like, oh my God, I learned a ton. But a lot of it is super unnecessary and incredibly fun and a really wild batch of years the last 5, 6 years.
Yeah, I trim the fat every once in a while on it.
Yeah,
If there's stuff I'm not using,
sure.
eventually it goes, or I make it inactive and hide it.
Yep.
And yeah, there can be overkill. I don't think it's so much about overkill with the gear as overkill with your mind.
Mm,
If you know where it's all going and why it's going there and your gain structure is correct,
hmm.
it should be just more like an instrument you're playing. Just like if you're a really good guitar player,
Right.
you can get around the neck anywhere. And even if you get yourself back in a corner, you can find your way out of it. It's fluid. It's a part of you. You know your instrument, you know the feel, you know how to push it, you know how to pull it back. It's the same thing. This is just my instrument that I've been playing for a really long time.
Mm,
And that's why this template started a gazillion years ago. And yeah, it's bigger now, but the core of it's the core of it. And it's sort of been that way a long time.
mm,
And I know for me where to put the faders, or I have it set up so where the faders start when my guys put the wave files in for me and hit play, it'll sound like a song to start.
oh, cool.
Like it'll sound usually by the time, luckily, these days, usually when it's ready, like I'm first hearing it when I hit play. And
Yeah.
since it's running through all my stuff, I'm already hearing it through my gear and hearing it
Mm,
through my buses. And I know what those are doing to the sound. So if something is detrimental to it, I can take it off really quickly.
Yeah.
And I just have the gain structure built down to a point where these faders, these buses, these this, these that, it's already hitting correctly.
Mm.
All the thresholds for everything are in the ballpark they need to be. Nothing is going to be like, I'm not going to have, if you were to put whatever strings up, a string section up on 12 string tracks in my template and hit play, if they're gain staged correctly on the audio,
Mm.
it's going to sound like a good string section to start. And then all I have to do is work it a little bit more.
Sweet.
um, versus like starting from scratch and putting up faders and trying to figure out, well, what is the gain stage and what's going to be the loudest thing and where do I start my mix at? I'm
Yeah.
like hitting play and it's basically like a rough mix already there, as well as the client's rough mix. So I can like pop their rough mix on and go, all right, they added a bunch of verb on the drums and this is brighter and let me go back. Okay, yeah, they scooped some low mids out. They did this. So it's like I can instantly, my mix probably sounds like a scaled down version of what they had already. Or sometimes, in some cases, it already sounds better
Better, yeah.
because it just, they did it at home and they don't have great monitoring and whatever EQ they used on their mix was all wacky because there's all this low end in their room. And, you know,
And they're not
my
going through all your nice combinations of
yeah, everything here is like hitting stuff when I open it up. So yeah, it's
yeah,
gonna
that's
yeah
fun.
yeah, when it's running through tube compressors and all sorts of fun gear, it's already gonna have a little more of a thing to it. It's gonna
Yeah.
push and breathe a little bit more right out the start.
Yeah, that's a blast. Gives me
So,
lots of ideas. It's exciting. You're a very cool person to talk to there, Matteo.
thanks. Yeah, it's been a
Mm.
lot of fun.
It's been awesome. I need to come visit you, and I would love for you to come visit me.
Yeah, anytime you're out in New Jersey, New York, let me know.
Yeah,
I'll have you
and
come
I can
tour
hook you
one
up
of the
with Steven.
studios.
I can hook you up with Steven over at the power station, and
Yeah, I'd definitely love to go there and check it out again. I haven't seen it since they've redone the whole I know like it's all different now other than the studios.
yeah,
So
they
they took
they've.
they took away the freight elevator and like all the crazy stuff that used to be there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they from what I understand, I saw a little video on it, but that's all I've seen. And there was like
I forgot
making
about the freight elevators.
yeah, I'm sure it's all different now other than the studios itself. When the basement's not the basement anymore, I guess. And
Yeah.
that's something else, or that's I don't know. I saw a video. It seemed very interesting, but I definitely want to get back there and check it out at some point.
Do you know Al Schmitt?
I I assisted the assistant a couple of times for him, and he was like one of the nicest guys.
Yeah, he's
I
awesome.
specifically remember meeting him, and I think I had to go get his muffin or his bagel or something. And he asked me my name, and then the next day he remembered it, and I was like, "That's really nice that he." But you hear these stories about how he. I specifically remember setting up the first time that he came in, and everyone knew who he was, and it was like a big deal. And I
Oh, yeah.
remember doing the setup, and at the time, we were doing a lot of like modern rock stuff and everything, lots of gear and lots of mics. And like he came in with this super simple setup, and I thought as like a young buck, like this guy's
Mhm.
not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna get to learn anything. And it's like he had like one compressor and these like kind of simpler miking setups. And it's like he went into the room and I don't it's like he made 2 fader moves, and all of a sudden it sounded like an album, and it was just like, "Wait
Yeah.
a minute." Like, there's no EQ, there's, like, 1 dB of compression on the bass, and,
Yeah.
like, 1 dB of compression on the vocal, and it already sounds like a finished record. How the hell did he and I'm looking at the console, and there's not 1 EQ engaged. It's
Wow.
just like he had these I don't even and this was so long, this is, like, 20 years ago or whatever, but I just remember being at first thinking like I'm not going to get to learn much here to thinking what kind of voodoo does this guy do or there's a reason he's got 18 million Grammys because He's just so good. He was so nice and pleasant, and watching him interact with the artist, it was like he just made them all feel so at ease.
Yeah.
It's just like Al is here, everything's under control, and he would just talk to them and like almost like prop them up. He just
Oh,
had a
nice.
really good way about how we talk to people, from what I
Oh,
remember.
wow.
And maybe this is all wrong, and maybe my memory is not. We tend to
I
remember
don't think
things
so. That fits
one
everything
way,
I've heard.
but the limited time I had with him, which was, I don't know, maybe he did 4 or 5 records over the period that I was there, and, those records that he did weren't 3-month records. Although I wanna say maybe he did a Diana Krall record that took a while. Maybe it was Diana Krall.
Well, he was taught by Phil Ramone. So
I I got to watch Phil work a bunch of times too, that was really
that's
cool.
cool. I used to
Yeah.
dance around with him at graduations. We'd be in our gowns and just laughing about things. And I think I gave him a cassette tape once, but um,
I remember him
yeah.
being very serious.
Oh yeah, no, he was a goofball when I was hanging with him.
I just mean with the work, like, he was
Oh yeah,
it you could tell he thought on another level. He had in his head
he was amazing.
the picture, he knew what it was gonna be before it was anything, and he was just like his arrangement ability and the way another guy, from what I remember, he could just talk to the client, he could talk to the artist
Yeah,
in a way that just made everything seem like he made them feel right,
nice.
he made the world, everything feel good, and
I've
yeah,
been
I
in
mean
touch with Al over the years because a young guy named Matt came in for guitar lessons at my Berklee schedule once, and he says, "Yeah, my dad's an engineer." And I glance over at his last name. I went, "Your dad is Elliot Scheiner?" I absolutely flipped, And then he came to his son's graduation, and then he spoke at graduation, and I was able to say
oh,
hello,
nice.
to go to his house in Connecticut, and he's going to come on and do a chat with me too here.
Oh,
So
awesome. Yeah, I remember getting to
he's
watch him work a little
absolute
bit.
sweetheart.
Yeah, he was another one of those guys that just, like, it sounded good right out of the gate, and
Yeah,
just it sounded like a record before, like, anything happened.
yeah.
I don't know how, and not, like, with 87 compressors and all, yeah, it just,
And
just
what a
legend.
man, a man of quality, just like yourself. I mean, he was on the phone a couple times with Japan talking to Panasonic, trying to get the ELS requirements together. And he was like, no, no, my name's not going to go on that. I told you what we need, and he's pacing back and forth, like, this is what it has to be. And I was like, yeah, get
Yeah,
this
when you
right.
got that kinda resume, they're gonna do it your way or not do it at
Oh, they're
all.
not going to use his name otherwise. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, he was,
So cool.
another legend.
Really,
Another
really cool.
I think he's retired now, right? I don't think he's
I don't know. We'll find out, I guess. I know Grammy Awards are very heavy. So when he left me in his surround room and I saw the Grammys up on the wall, I was like, I had to go pick up one of the Grammys. It was like 5 pounds, those things are heavy. How heavy are the Emmys? You have a ton of them. You got
I guess
four,
they're
eight,
about that 5.
5.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
It's just the right place, the right time. I mean, I didn't do anything different than I don't do the other 5,000 times, it's just
Right,
a
right.
couple of
But
the artists were good enough where
the
it worked.
stars align.
Yeah, I really don't think it was anything I did at all. I think it's definitely, I mean, some of the artists or some of the shows that I did, they were just good, I mean, Lady Gaga's Lady Gaga. She's gonna do compelling things that make people like it and win awards. So you just go along for the ride.
Part of a winning team. Yeah, that works. Well, you're being very humble. But of course, if you didn't have any of that stuff together, the show wouldn't have gone off and there wouldn't have been any awards. And people wouldn't have thought that Lady Gaga did a good job that day, and it would have been the sound.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, do people even notice the sound? It's
I was at the Grammy Awards the year Bob Dylan got a special award and performed. And I think Yoko was on stage that night too. And Bette Midler was singing. and she danced too far away from one of the monitors and all of a sudden went flat. And she quickly danced right back in front of that monitor again. I thought, wow, this really is live. You know, they're really pulling off the sound live.
Yeah, those shows, I don't really do a lot of award shows, but I've done variety things and things where uh some telethons and different stuff like that where it's like artist after artist after artist. And
That's hard.
yeah, it can be. I mean, a lot of times now, back in the day, it'd be full bands. A lot of times it's vocal to track now, and a lot of that stuff, like the music's pre-recorded and it's just the vocals that are live.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just a lot of
It's just too much.
it's just too much for producers these days of these expensive shows to risk, getting another 48 input band swapped out for another 50 input band. And then this one's got a string section and a dance routine. And, it's so I understand why they do it,
Yeah.
but it's still, like this year for the tree lighting at Rockefeller Plaza, I do those every year.
Oh, wow.
And what was it? We were going to have I think it poured the day of the tree lighting. So the day of we usually do a setup day, a rehearsal day, and then show day we do a dress rehearsal and the show.
Oh my God.
And they decided on the rehearsal day that it's going to pour so bad the next day that we're going to tape pretty much all of them today.
Wow.
So I think I tracked 30 songs and mixed in like 12 hours or something.
Oh my God.
So if it was full bands, I would have been killed. I think one was a full band and everything else was like vocal to track, I think, or maybe it was all vocal to track. But I mean, still just going through, was it 3 or 4 songs per artist? And I think eight or 10 artists.
Wow.
And it was just like, bring the next one out, rehearse, record, rehearse, record, rehearse, record. They're done. Next,
Wow.
and you're just moving your console along to the next one. And that's all preparation. That whole anything. That's why in general, I always you said anything else that I could tell people is preparation,
Mm.
preparation, preparation. You got a session coming in.
Mm-hmm.
You never worked with the guys before.
Mm.
You better make sure every mic has been tested, every headphone is good. Make sure the instrument that you tested, you hear it going through the headphones and it seems like it's
Mm.
in the right place. You want them to walk in and be able to sit down and hear themselves and play. The
Mm-hmm.
last thing you want is them to be waiting around for stuff. You're going to nosedive the thing right away. So I'd rather spend 8 hours prepping for a 4-hour session and have that 4-hour session go smooth
Right.
than have them waiting around while I'm running around changing patch cords and figuring out why something's not working because
Mm-hmm.
that tube mic wasn't working that day or whatever. I'm such a proponent of being prepared. Before I mix anything, I've already done a day of prep.
Yeah.
Before I track anything, I've already figured out the input list. If someone's assisting
Oh.
me, they've got the input lists.
Mm-hmm.
We've, like I just did one where we traveled to another studio because I couldn't use the A room here; it was booked, and I had to bring a ton of gear with me. We pulled the gear out of my racks here, re-racked it, ran it through different patch bay, did a completely new headphone system we put together, built
Cool.
it. I checked it all in this room before we left to go to that studio, every line, every single thing. So we got in there and had a 4 or 5 hour window to get ready for the band. And when the band showed up, we were completely ready for them.
Wow.
Took them an hour to get their tour bus unloaded and everything and get their gear inside. And I think they showed up at noon and we had sounds for 50 inputs and had the first song tracked by like 5 p.m.
Wow.
And there was barely any like we've got to fix this or we got to do this or it was all happening. And oh,
That's
that guy,
amazing. This is Romeo.
Romeo.
They're getting fidgety. They're like, we need to go outside.
All right, well, we'll let you get going then. I should get home soon too. I got a new pup, so
You
he
do have a
probably
new
needs
pup.
it.
What'd you get?
English bulldog, Bacala.
Bacala.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. He's a kind of stout, husky little man.
I got
Yeah.
a little girl over there too. She's like a long hair and he's a smooth. But one thing, what you were just saying, could backfire, it has backfired on me, is don't let anybody change a bunch of things once you've checked everything.
Oh no,
I
don't.
had somebody come in and they're like, we don't need this mic, we don't need this. I'm like, okay, we could put the drums this way and we could do this and we could try that. And they're moving everything on, then all of a sudden everything was different. And we had all kinds of problems. And I was like, I should never let anybody do that.
Yeah, I take the approach of overkill. Like I
Yeah,
would rather have 5 extra mics set up,
I
ready
did.
to go.
But then as soon as they start unplugging things and putting them in different places, that's a bad thing.
No, I stick to my setup, and if it doesn't get used, I
Just
ended up
mute it. Just
with
mute it,
like
move
6
on.
extra channels that we didn't need, but
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we needed one. For instance, like I was telling my assistant, they decided to start off with the House B3, which is a great sounding B3, but
Mm,
different than the guy's A100 or whatever he had. And I could tell after we cut the first song that he just wasn't jiving with that instrument. That B3 just didn't play like his does. Didn't sound
mm.
bad. It just didn't play the way his did. So I was already telling these guys, listen, I know what's coming. Get this other one ready to go. Get the cabling, get the other Leslie, have it on standby.
Right.
We didn't finish that next take where it's like, hey, do you think we can switch out the organ? Of course, no problem. We're all ready to go for that. So that's so important, is just to be prepared and have everything ready so the artist can change whatever he needs to change, whatever she needs to change. And just if you hear like them talking and they're talking about doing a piano overdub and you're the assistant, you should be wrangling mics together to put on the piano if it's not mic'd up already. Even if they don't use it. Oh, there you go. Looks like one of my little guys. I think I lost your sound.
I had muted so you didn't hear the rumbling around.
That's all good.
I didn't
All right.
want
Well,
any
actually,
much
I should
down.
probably get going too here. I didn't realize it was 5:30 already. Jeez. I still got to set up for this stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't
You're
realize it was so
amazing.
late. Hey, well,
It's
thank you
so
so much for having me. I
it was so
appreciate it.
cool, so cool to meet you, and I really look forward to meeting you in person.
Absolutely. Anytime you're in town and anytime I'm up your way, I'll definitely reach out.
Oh, thank you. I would love that.
And then, yeah, let me know when you're going to put this stuff all out and I'll spread the word.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, if you want, I'll send you a copy too for your YouTube channel.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
it'd be so cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mateo.
All right. Stay in touch. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.